Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Tsunade fell in love with Naruto after becoming a Hokage of Village part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. I'm falling apart, it's like I'm lost in the motions. Use my pain as a rope to wrap around the commotion. Tie the knot at my throat, I look at death cause a notion. I don't want it no more, I don't want it no more. My eyes slick with tears as I stare in the clouds, thoughts racing around. I've done so much bad, so much bad. I hope one day you can forgive me. I never wanted to be an enemy. I've only ever wanted to help. It's all I wanted to do. Hiko, please forgive me. It hurts. It hurts so bad. I can't feel my body, can't feel my fingers, my bones are brittle, and my breathing is shallow. Sweat cascades down my face, nearly blinding me. My feet ache and my heart hurts. The grunt escapes me and I wheeze quietly, ribs creaking from the fight. Bagata Yahiko, I wheeze, eyes blurring from fatigue. Uzumaki Naruto, the waves I stand atop nearly bowl me over as I struggle to stay afloat. The rain had finally stopped. Another shift of the water knocks me over as I release a pained cry, knees splashing against the harsh waves of water. It's awful sweat or tears slowly stream down my face. I heard it hurts. Scarred and coarse hands crash into the rolling current as a wave of nausea courses through my body. Stomach acid ejects through my mouth as I slowly succumb to my wounds. I wasn't strong enough, Nagato. As my eyes slowly drift shut, I hear the sound of laughter. A man's laughter. Liquid fire courses through my veins as my head snaps upright, coming face to face with the man that I killed. Dread coils around my heart and fear stains my being. How did he survive? How? You nearly got me. I'll give you that. His voice, appraising and demeaning. Who would have thought that you'd have actually put up a fight so brazen? But the game is over now, Conan. He takes a step towards me, the waves of a megacurse slowly tapering down as he nears my position. That ugly mask is broken and cracked, revealing a spiraling crimson eye and a milky white orb. In my confusion and fear, I notice nothing. The only thing on my mind is the disbelief of him having survived. I killed him. No. To think I'd be pushed to use such a jutsu against the likes of you, Toby scoffs in disdain. No matter, after I kill you, Nagato's eyes will be put to good use, or should I say Madara's eyes. Get up. I scream desperately. Get up now. Despite the adrenaline now coursing through my veins, my body is powerless to act. The corners of my vision begin to slowly blacken as I stare at Toby. This is the end. I lament quietly, fatigue finally claiming me. In the end I couldn't even avenge you, Nagato. Tears streamed down my face and though I was prideful, I let them fall with little care. For my end is near and I cannot change it. And so I accept my end with open arms. With a heavy heart and a defeated soul, I open my palms to the sky and raise my head in defiance. If I am to die, then I shall do so with what little pride I have left. I'm sorry, Naruto, I murmur quietly into the sky. And though I was a realist to the very end, dregs of hope clung to my dying body. The notion should have shaken me. After all, I was the one to abandon it after Yahiko's death. And even when Nagato's mind was warped and his body forever a paraplegic, I followed out of loyalty. I never did share the same belief that peace could grasp our home. It was not possible. Mankind was not kind. We are a cruel being and words do nothing but delay the inevitable. But I'm a hypocrite. For what does one do when faith is crushed? They hope. And with what little strength I possess, I make eye contact with the creature known as Toby and quietly speak. My death will be your end. He seems amused by my words, as if I weren't even worth the effort of words. It meant nothing to me. I am but a dying woman, running off fading adrenaline and spite. If only to make my end more annoying to Toby. You will die a coward, you are not Madara. If you were, I'd have not taken half your body. I cough harshly and a spiteful smile frames my face. Weak cockroach, I pray to the false gods above that you meet your end soon, and when you do, a surge of new strength overcomes me and I spit the words out with a hate so profound, I even shock myself. I'll be waiting to rip your soul apart piece by piece. My body is too broken to register the kick sent at my face, and though I can feel the cartilage of my nose break, I feel nothing. The crimson essence of life streams down my face, slipping into my orifice. The familiar taste of copper fills me with satisfaction. Even in death I will be spiteful. It's a pity that I cannot savor the anger rolling off of Toby. You little rat. Toby spews hatefully. Spare your words and reunite with Nagato and Yahiko. Look them in the eyes and tell them how you failed. A glint of metal catches my eye, but my mind has deteriorated. Exhaustion overtakes me as my head slowly lolls forward. In the end, you truly were useless. And though his words rang true, fulfillment filters through me. Because Toby is just a man and today I proved that. Finish what I could not. Uzumaki Naruto, my soul titters painfully and though my life flashes through my eyes, I cannot help but feel saddened. It shames me that in my final moment, I was truly nothing but a coward. I escaped the consequences of my actions, but at what cost? I ruined countless lives for a false dream, and though I failed to end the man responsible for it, I cannot help the worthlessness that overcomes me. I can only hope and believe that Naruto will finish what I started. The Juadamarasen Shuriken. A familiar and yet unknown scream tears through a megakure. And though I register the shockwave of power that sends me careening through Aim's ocean, I am hopeless to right my body. I skip along the surface of the water multiple times, and though I'm positive that I'm still alive, I cannot help but wonder if this all a dream. My mind is at least conscious enough to keep me from drowning, my chakra finally failing me to keep me atop the raging surface. And as I slowly begin to sink into the murky depths below, a pair of strong hands wrap around my body, tugging me away from the screaming depths. Vertigo rolls along my body, and my senses are flipped several times. In my delirious state I'm able to glimpse a glowing body. I gotcha. A familiar masculine voice sounds out. You're gonna be okay now. I promise. The words are foreign to me as I'm jostled lightly through the sky. In my exhausted state I'm conscious enough of my surroundings to take note of the distance traveled. If my math was correct, which it certainly wasn't, then I was just moved nearly 500 meters in an instant. My stomach churns painfully and I nearly spew vomit through my throat. I feel my feet sink into something dense and wet and can only hope that it's mud. My hands desperately reach out, fingers splaying and grasping for purchase. My ruby-painted nails dig into cloth and I find myself clutching onto it as if my life depended on it. A guffaw of laughter follows my actions and I am absolutely positive that it was not me. Hey. It's okay. Everything's going to be fine. Once more that familiar voice reassures me and I find myself starting to believe them. They just seemed so assured of themselves. Their belief and words just nestled into my chest, filling me with a fire that had been previously dimming. A harsh gasp escapes through my body as a source of chakra enters through my body. My body instantly clamps down on itself and threatens to shut down for a split moment. Thankfully, the chakra entering my veins only seeks to aid me. And so, I allow it do so. An unquenchable thirst takes over me and I allow it. More. Another bark of laughter resounds from just above me, the same familiar male voice speaking out again. Hahaha. Slow down, Conan. It's not going anywhere. And though I wish not to, I find myself listening to the voice. It's soothing and calming despite how loud it is. It's comforting and I find myself relaxing. Don't worry, I'm gonna end this here and now. Their voice, once again, was so reassuring. Filled with so much strength I cannot help but hope to cling off of it. I finally gain enough strength from the individual's chakra to slowly open my eyes. A nearly blinding golden light assaults my vision and my mind reels back from it. There is no danger here, but my body cannot help but tense at the glowing flames wafting off the man. Ethereal chakra clung to the man almost like a second skin. He possessed a sharp chin with dimpled cheeks, likely from the grin that now framed his face. His canines were abnormally sharp and thick, black markings painted his cheeks like whiskers. This person looks like then Naruto, I weakly rasp, fingers wrenching the glowing Haori, as if afraid of the man disappearing. That joyous grin of his seems to soften as his unique heterochromic orbs roam across my face. His teeth slowly disappear as his smile forces his eyes to crease, hiding the familiar taijutsu of the Hyuga clan. It's good to see you too, Conan. I cannot help but try to laugh at the absurdity of it all. It comes out harsh and devolves into a brutal coughing fit. I spit blood from my mouth and receive a quiet yelp of shock from the Jinchuriki. And despite the pain coursing through my entire body, a new strength seems to invade me. Hope, I quietly muse to myself. How very cliché. Exhaustion was a concept that Conan was intimately familiar with. She had bonded with it since she was a babe. Being orphaned as a toddler and forced to fend for yourself does that. Whether that be from starvation, sleep deprivation or plain out fatigue. Even while conscious, she couldn't open her eyes. The action would have been far too tiring, and every single bit of her body seemed to ache and hurt. Her head pounded ferociously and even through closed eyes, the bright lights from above were blinding. The stench of disinfectant and various other chemicals assaulted her nostrils. The hospital, she quietly mused, confused for all of 3 seconds before remembering exactly why she was here. Her last thoughts were of being saved by Uzumaki Naruto of all people. A gentle exhale of breath escaped her nostrils, and boy did that action hurt as she recalled her fight with Toby and her near death at his hands. Conan had accepted her death after failing to kill that coward before being saved by Naruto. The action was jarring. Why was Naruto in a megakure in the first place? What had compelled him to come? She had since renounced her position in the Akatsuki and had instead chosen to betray them. It was why Toby had been in AIM in the first place, searching for Nagato's corpse. At the thought of Nagato's corpse, her eyes shot open and a horrendous amount of pain shot through her body. She released a shrill cry of pain as her body tensed painfully. Her eyes picked up an incessant rapid beeping noise and she was half tempted to send several paper shurikens to shut the damn thing off. She was spared from doing so as the door to the room practically burst open, several feet rushing into the room judging by the noise. Conan picked up several female voices, some of which seemed to be expressing genuine concern and annoyance. She was left confused for a brief second before hearing a familiar voice. "I just want to see if she's okay." One of the various nurses grunted quietly, as if performing some sort of exercise. "And I told you that we'd handle it, Naruto." The nurse grunted again as her feet skid along the floor, failing to hold the man back. "Kami, why are you so strong? Just let me see." He insisted sternly, physically picking the petite nurse up and moving her aside, ignoring her yelp of surprise. "Conan. Are you okay?" She wouldn't have been able to answer even if she wanted to. Despite the brief adrenaline that shot through her, she was left in an even more exhausted state afterwards. Her consciousness drifted in and out several times, but she was keenly aware of Naruto's voice in the room, and oddly enough, it brought a sense of comfortability that she desperately wanted. Dusty grunted quietly, shouldering aside the three nurses who tried to push him out the room. "Just let me stay in. I won't cause problems. You being here is already against protocol." One of the nurses retorted in annoyance, checking Conan's vitals and making sure the woman was fine. Naruto scoffed playfully, adjusting his headband in a manner similar to his former masked sensei. "I exist despite protocol. I'm staying besides, Bachan said it was fine." The head DR rolled her eyes before replying. "Fine. Just don't touch anything. I'm watching you, Uzumaki." The one-eyed teen winked his cerulean orb as he responded. "Cross my heart and hope to die." Conan finally succumbed to her exhaustion once again as the nurses began their precursory observations. With the knowledge that she was still alive and well, she finally relaxed. If Naruto was still alive, then Toby was either dead or he had prioritized her life. Knowing him for the brief amount of time that she did, she'd bet that he had gone out of his way to make sure she was safe before engaging Toby and ending him. She was pretty confident that he had already accomplished in killing Toby. That was certainly new. "Shouldn't you be watching over your little girlfriend?" Tsunade idly commented from her seated position, head not rising from her paperwork. Naruto scoffed playfully, slouching against the woman's desk with his back facing her. "Oh, you got jokes, now do ya?" He crossed his arms against his chest before replying. "I have clones watching over her, she'll be fine." The blonde Cage only offered a quiet hum of acknowledgement as she continued scribbling along the parchment. "Get your ass off my desk." She stamped one of the papers before setting it aside in a pile full of other documented papers. "So rude." He replied back while staying in his seated position. "And here I thought you wanted to spend quality time with your favorite godson." A faux depressed sigh escaped him as he continued. "Why does my Bachan hate me?" Tsunade would not and did not rise to the boy's bait. 19 years of age, the strongest shinobi under her command, and he still chose to act like a 12-year-old. But that's why she loved him. Platonically, of course. Naruto would forever be the annoying, troublesome son that she never had. Kami rest Kushina's soul, but she had taken a liking to Naruto, and if it came to blows on who could claim ownership, well, Tsunade would absolutely throw hands with the boy's biological mother. And she'd definitely win. "Listen here you little shit," she began quietly, stamping another paper. "I sent you on a diplomatic mission to Omegakure, and you come back with a heavily injured ex-leader of the Akatsuki, alongside the corpse of the actual leader." She finally rose her head to stare at the boy with a fierce glare. "Do you realize how much more paperwork I now have to sign?" Naruto had the decency to at least look apologetic, and it was probably the best she was going to get out of him, so that was definitely a win in her book. "It wasn't my fault," he proclaimed childishly. "How would I have known that Conan was going to be fighting for her life against the masked guy?" Tsunade did not bother offering a response. She already knew how bad Naruto's luck was while out on solo missions. It's precisely why she rarely gave him the damn things. The little shit would turn a simple escort mission into some quadruple S rank mission that'd end up usurping an entire country, saving some random princess, and destroying an entire organization of rogue shinobi. "How is she?" she instead questioned, pushing her paperwork away while she conversed with her son in all but blood. The Jinchuriki sighed quietly as he adjusted his headband, a nervous habit he'd yet to get rid of. "Stable for now." An exhausted sigh escaped the teen as his shoulders slowly dropped. "It was touch and go for a while. If I hadn't shown up when I did, then she wouldn't even have made it. Apparently she nearly destroyed her chakra nervous system. Whatever she did must have been extreme." Tsunade raised a delicate eyebrow as she clasped her hands together. "Seems rather reckless of her. Didn't you say she was more level-headed and rational?" "She doesn't necessarily strike me as the type to engage in something rather suicidal." Understanding the underlying comment, Naruto sighed once more. "I felt the explosion several miles out of Omegakure, and that's the only reason I arrived in time. She used up her entire tank to cast her jutsu. The fact she was still standing when I got there was impressive in itself." "Tenacious." Tsunade commented with a hint of respect. Naruto's eyes drifted out towards the village as he absent-mindedly nodded his head. His single visible eye unfocused for several minutes as he unconsciously ignored his surroundings. Hey. The blonde Jinchuriki was shaken from his thoughts as Tsunade nudged him. Her face was contorted in concern as she stared into his eye. You okay? She already knew the answer. He began quietly, lone orb looking anywhere but at Tsunade's eyes. It's just that time he fiddled with his headband once more as his tone shifted to a more melancholy one. I miss them. Tsunade nodded her head sadly, left hand grasping the boy's hand. She said nothing but words weren't needed between them. Are you going to visit them? She asked softly, gently stroking the boy's hand. The Byakugan wielder said nothing for a while, silently thinking to himself. He pursed his lips before eventually nodding slowly. Why yeah he stuttered quietly. Would you come with me? I don't like going alone. Tsunade's eyes softened as she gripped the boy's hand tightly. Of course, Naruto-kun. A sad smile framed the boy's face as he nodded. Thank you, Bachan. She rubbed the teen's hand for another minute before sighing wistfully. I miss them too. Naruto's visible eye fell to the floor as he nodded. Yeah, same. Silence swallowed the room after Naruto's words, and both blondes found comfort in it. The blonde duo silently made their way towards Konoha's cemetery, basking in the glow from the moon. The two shinobi traded no words with one another as they passed various citizens and other shinobi. Warm greetings and polite nods of respect were given to both blondes who returned them in kind. Naruto tilted his head towards the star-filled sky, pocketing his hands as he did so. Did you ever speak to father? When he was alive? He asked out of the blue. Tsunade's head tilted towards the taller blonde, curiosity painting her face. Why do you ask? It's been years since you found out why now. The Jinchuriki pursed his lips for a moment before shrugging his shoulders lazily. I don't know. He paused, searching for words to properly convey his feelings. I guess, with everything happening so fast I never got to sit down and actually deal with my internal issues regarding him. Tsunade quietly mused to herself. It was time for that talk. She'd be a liar if she said she was looking forward to it. She'd been walking over eggshells for the better part of 5 years since Hiruzen's death. Every day she cursed her former sensei and his lack of response to Naruto's well-being. It seemed that, at best, Hiruzen had done the absolute bare minimum. Naruto had a roof over his head and scraps of food when he was a child. The absolute bare minimum. And though she had been disgusted and appalled by this knowledge, it was not like she could have fixed it. What had happened to Naruto as a child could never be changed. The boy was sabotaged and hated. Despised for circumstances out of his control and forced to question his very existence. Many had claimed, to his very face, that his early struggles had made him strong. And that pissed her off more than anything. Naruto was a child. He wasn't supposed to be strong. He was supposed to be safe. And Sensei couldn't even do that. Jiraiya was no better, and while she loved that man dearly, it didn't change the fact that he had also shirked his duties. Naruto and Jiraiya's relationship was strained from the very first meeting, and Tsunade had never truly broached the subject. Tsunade silently shook her head, abandoning the thoughts, and instead glanced towards her son. Well, let me answer that with a question of my own. Don't make that face, I can see you. She proceeded to slap the boy on the back of his head, ignoring his yelp of pain. How do you feel about Minato? Rubbing the back of his head, Naruto crinkled his nose. I mean, I don't hate him but I also don't really know him. I know of him, but that's where it really ends. Everyone always said that he was brave, courageous, strong. A quiet sigh left his lips as he adjusted his headband, slowly lifting it up and revealing his taijutsu. But that means nothing to me. So what if he was strong? I'm strong too. Courageous. Brave. What does that really do for me? I'm all of those things as well. No one seems to have the answer, and I never bothered asking Jiraiya. I didn't want a biased perspective. Tsunade needed a fucking drink. It was far too early for her to be having this kind of heart-to-heart with her son. The Senju was silent for several long moments, collecting her thoughts in a way that would make absolutely perfect sense to Naruto. It took a little over 2 minutes for it to eventually come to her, but it eventually did. As the two blondes stepped through the gated entry of the cemetery, Tsunade finally opened her mouth to speak. If you don't hate him then why should it matter? She asked slowly and softly, speaking in a gentle tone so as to not come across inconsiderate. Minato was a man revered for his strength and intelligence. It was his ingenuity and talent that cemented his position as the Hokage. I respect Minato as a leader of this village, but I do not respect his actions. She came to a stop, pivoting on her heel and staring at the teen. He did what he did because he believed it was the best situation. I'm sure thousands of alternatives invaded his mind at the same time, but he did the one thing expected from a Kage. He put the village first. Naruto stated in an acidic manner. Tsunade tried to not wince at his tone. Your father was a shrewd man who thought rationally and logically first. Regardless of his actions, he could not predict Hiruzen's lack of care and Jiraiya's irresponsibility. It was only as bad as it was because of circumstances that were completely out of your control. The Jinchuriki shook his head with a bitter smile. My life in a nutshell. He shook his head once again before continuing. I may not hate him, but I don't like him and I don't know how I feel about that. The blonde Kage offered a sympathetic smile before gently stroking his arm. You're allowed to be angry, Naruto. The only validation you need is from yourself. You want to hate Minato. Hate him. You want to forgive him. Then forgive him. But don't ever question what's right or wrong. You were the victim. I hate that word. He spat quietly. Being called a victim makes me feel helpless. But are you helpless? She fired back with a raised eyebrow. From what I've seen, you're far from it. Have I ever told you how proud I am of you? Because I am. She nudged the boy's shoulder, smiling softly as he averted his gaze bashfully. Regardless of your past, you've grown into an amazing man. You're a kind-hearted man in a world full of hate. And I'm sure Kushina is frothing at the mouth by now, but I'm honored that you see me as a mother. At this point, Naruto's face was practically blazing. They had danced around the subject for years pertaining to their relationship. Tsunade was the mother he had always wanted, and Naruto was the son she never had. Their relationship had blossomed after the Chunin exams, and while they spat and slung insults from time to time, the love was and always will be there. Naruto quietly rubbed his eyes, trying to hide the tears that were surely there. He sniffed quietly as he spoke in a guilty tone. Do you think mom is angry at me? Tsunade glanced at the boy before offering a gentle and warm smile. I may be a shitty gambler, but I'm absolutely positive that she's happy to know that someone filled the void you desperately needed. That woman would go to hell and back for the things she loved. This is the same woman that had a Biju ripped out of her and continued to fight, knowing she would die all to protect you. A small smile took over the boy's features as he wrapped the shorter woman in a fierce hug. Ack. Tsunade croaked quietly. Too tight. Sounds like a personal problem. He instantly retorted, arms squeezing tighter. You're so lucky that my arms are trapped or else I'd be punting your annoying ass across the village. The blonde woman grunted quietly, trying to tug her arms out the death hug she was receiving. Kami, damn it. When did you get so strong? I've always been strong. He chuckled quietly before crying out in pain. Oh. The boy instantly released his hold on the woman, cradling his right foot. Now I see why you wear the heels, dangerous little things. Tsunade nodded her head, fixing her green haori with a quiet huff. That's what I thought, you little shit. So very rude. Naruto replied with a small chuckle. Tsunade flipped the boy off, flinging her long hair into the boy's face. Sounds like a personal problem. She smugly replied, using his own words against him. Wow. Look at you. You're getting funnier every day. It's too bad it only took half a century though. His form instantly burst into smoke as Tsunade's fist crashed into the side of his jaw. Little she snarled angrily. Get back here and fight me like a man. Off in the distance, she heard the boy yell out a reply that made her see red. You're man enough for the both of us. The boulder the size of the Hokage tower was sent careening towards Naruto's voice, nearly destroying the large gates that enclosed the cemetery. Hey there sleepyhead, nice of you to finally join us. Confusion spreads throughout my body at the familiar voice. I hadn't heard that voice in nearly 15 years. But I blink a single time before coming face to face with Hiko. I gasp out quietly, shocked to see his smiling face. His grin grows just a tad bit bigger as he rubs the back of his neck. Well duh. Who else would it be? He tilts his head, eyebrows furrowing. It was touch and go for a while, but you pulled through. He pulled through? What was he even talking about? Before I could question his words, another familiar voice resounds just to my left, on the opposite side of Yahiko. Conan. Are you well? The gentle voice sends tremors throughout my entire body. We were worried about you. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream. And Nagata, my heart cracks and I'm hopeless to stop the tears that cascade down my face. Ah. Yahiko yelps in surprise, brown eyes roaming over my body in concern. Nagato, you scared her. I told you to be more careful. The youthful-looking and not crippled Nagato offers a small shrug with a weary smile. His beautiful crimson hair lolls down the side of his face, his full face. I tried to be as gentle as possible. He replied, tone still soft. You're the one yelling, Yahiko. He pointed out with a ghost of a smile. Confusion. Shock. Relief. I cannot possibly fathom these emotions as they swirl around my body like an angry tornado. All I know is that I'm crying and I cannot prevent the tears. I missed you too. Why did you leave? Where did you go? I babble incessantly. I thought I lost you too. Titobi Madara. My babbling tapers off into incoherent garbage as I become a slave to the emotions I've held at bay. I don't know how much time has passed, but I am aware of the warmth from the two men. Their arms wrap around me to hold on tighter, and I cry even harder, apologizing and garbling intelligible words. Conan, we've missed you too. Yahiko's voice whispers out softly. I find comfort in his words and feel old emotions slowly stirring in my heart. But he continues softly, voice breaking as he utters his next words. It's not your time, you're still needed. What? My heart hammers in my chest and my legs begin to turn to jelly. I cannot stand without help from Yahiko and Nagato, and I'm not sure if I even wanted. And no, I shake my head in denial, slowly pulling away from the two men. I can't lose you two again, I can't, not again. I see a sad smile form on Nagato's face. You still have a goal you must accomplish, and the one you have to help will need your aid, Conan. No, 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 no. It wasn't fair. I lost them once before. I can't do this anymore. Please. I plead and beg, falling to my knees as Nagato and Yahiko begin to slowly disappear. I can't go on anymore. I can't, I just can't. My voice runs hoarse as I scream at them. Come back. Please. We can't do that, Conan. Nagato mutters quietly, tone full of regret. Take me with you. I bellow loudly, outstretching my right hand towards their position. It isn't your time, Conan. Yahiko responds with a tearful smile. It was nice to see you again, though you've grown even more beautiful since the last time I saw you. My heart practically splits in half as I reach out towards the both of them, fingers passing through them as if they were never there. The relief I felt is gone, and in its place is nothing but fear and hopelessness. Naruto will need your help. Nagato states firmly, his voice finally raising, as if speaking with finality. I entrusted him with our dream, and were you not the one that vowed to protect him? Did you not claim that he possesses all of Omegacure's loyalty? Nagato's words practically slap me in the face, briefly bringing me out of my despair. But that wasn't fair. Before she could offer a weak excuse to his words, Yahiko chimes in. Nagato told me all about this Uzumaki Naruto, he seems like a good guy. A grin splits his features as he thumbs over towards Nagato. Besides, anyone who can kick Nagato's ass is definitely an alright guy in my book. Nagato offers little more than a soft smile, Rinnegan gazing into my eyes. His next words come out soft but firmly. Please, Conan, protect him. I know he can bring change to our broken world. You know it too. Yahiko stays silent and my eyes seek his, desperately pleading with him. But he only offers me a sad smile, nodding his head at Nagato's words. But those final words, my childhood friends vanish into thin air and I'm left alone. Again. Hey, Bachan, Naruto questioned quietly, hands finding purchase in his pockets. The blonde woman glanced towards the Jinchuriki with a small frown. MHM? She hummed quietly. Do you think Team 7 is forever cursed? He questioned tiredly. His single cerulean orb roamed along the names etched into the memorial stone. A heavy sigh was his answer. Yeah, he mumbled quietly. I thought so. The Jinchuriki slowly raised his hand towards the hardened stone, tracing over a specific name. Pada Kakashi. The blonde teen pursed his lips, memories of the infamous Jonin resurfacing. I wish I could have told him, he utters quietly, slowly speaking his mind. That I forgave him a long time ago. Tsunade offered a gentle gesture, wrapping an arm around the boy's back and placing her head on his shoulder. You know how Kakashi was, Naruto. He wouldn't have held it against you. Hell, he probably never even forgave himself. Yeah, he nods quietly. Sensei always did love being melodramatic. The quiet chuckle emanated from the busty woman. Don't speak ill of the dead, they can hear you, you know. Naruto snorts quietly, shaking his head with a small genuine smile. As if Sensei would care. Tsunade notices that his eyes gloss over another name. Already knowing how he felt about that particular member, she began to squeeze his arm, offering what little support she could. Uruno Sakura. The conflicted expression framed the Jinchuriki's face as he stares at Sakura's name. His old childhood crush held a special place in his heart. And not for good reasons. The bitter expression slowly overcomes him as memories of the pink-haired medic flashes in his mind. Shaking his head with closed eyes, he speaks aloud, more so venting than anything. When I was a kid I thought I loved her. She gave me attention, and although it was always negative, it was still more than anyone else gave me. He sighs quietly, taking comfort in Tsunade's presence. As I've gotten older though, I've come to the realization of how broken I truly was. It's sad, isn't it? People always question why a man or a woman would continue running back to the person that hurts them, and it isn't something you can truly understand unless you've been in that person's shoes. Like, he continued quietly, hands gesturing out towards the stone, fingers stroking the etched name that belonged to Sakura. She'd always belittle and berate me, and yet, at the end of the day, when Sasuke crushed and stomped on her heart, I'd be standing right there behind her, like a loyal dog. A self-deprecating laugh escaped through his lips. And when Sasuke went rogue, I had to promise to bring back the one person I hated more than anything else, all because she asked me to do so. We were kids, so is it really fair for me to think like this? I loved Sakura, and yet I went to sleep every night with my heart hurting. Glancing down at his mother figure and with tears in his eyes, he spoke quietly. I wasn't the problem, right? Tsunade immediately pulled the boy into the crook of her neck. When his arm squeezed around her tightly, she stroked the back of his head, running her fingers through his spiky hair. "Of course not, Naruto," she soothed softly. Sakura had a bright future as a kunoichi, but she was ruled by her emotions, and in the end it killed her. Naruto didn't respond. But that was okay. He had done enough talking for the day. She didn't even want to open the can of worms that was Sasuke. She spoke softly, rubbing his back in a gentle manner. "Let's go check on your little girlfriend." She felt him twitch lightly at her light-hearted teasing and only smiled in response. Conan's amber orb stared up at the ceiling, blank and devoid of emotion. Yes, that was an accurate description. Blank and devoid of emotion. She was currently feeling that at this very moment. Just a little over an hour ago she had woken up, delirious and thirsty. A few minutes had passed by before a nurse appeared in her room, asking her mundane questions pertaining to how she was feeling. Apparently she had flatlined multiple times and had even had to have surgery. Conan wasn't even aware that she even needed surgery. She hadn't been that injured against Toby, at least she didn't remember being heavily injured. She had been informed that she was unconscious for 3 days. 3. The doctors had told her it was a miracle she was still alive and that if Naruto had arrived even a minute later that she would have perished on the hospital bed. Naruto, she quietly thought to herself. Why had he been in a megacure? It was a question that had been bouncing around in her head for the last 20 or so minutes. The rational part of her mind was firm in its belief that he had been there to eliminate her, erasing a potential threat due to her involvement with the Akatsuki. Though her heart vehemently denied it. If he had wanted her dead then he wouldn't have saved her. Or perhaps he was doing so to gain access to Nagato's corpse. The thought made her ill. Despite not actually knowing Naruto, she couldn't possibly believe that he'd do something so devious. If she was alive then Nagato and Yahiko's corpses were safe. Nagato's Rinnegan couldn't possibly have been taken. Her amber orbs traveled down to her left arm, tracing the intricate C-link onto her body. She stared at it for several seconds before averting her gaze to the ceiling and sighing quietly. Her thoughts were becoming bothersome and the silence was certainly not helping. It didn't help that the conversation she had had with Nagato and Yahiko kept repeating in her head. But it hurt. The door to her room burst open, startling her and distracting her from spiraling downward. A head of spiky, blonde hair bounded through the room, followed by a feminine voice. And judging by her irate tone, she was clearly displeased. "What did I tell you about slamming doors open? Stop being an inconsiderate little shit." Conan watched as the petite and very busty woman slapped the back of Naruto's head. It seemed incredibly painful judging by the way he reacted. "Oh, why do you gotta hit so damn hard?" Naruto responded petulantly, cradling his hammering skull. "You live." She responded with a nonchalant wave of the hand. "Yeah, with brain damage." The teen muttered in response. "Stop crying." Tsunade turned her head away from the Jinchuriki before locking eyes with Conan. Her annoyed expression vanished and in its place was a polite smile. "Well, look at what we have here. You're awake, boy." Naruto yelled out in annoyance. Both women turned their attention towards the teen, noticing him standing next to an identical version of himself. "Why didn't you tell me she was awake? We had an agreement." The clone blinked once before glancing around the room in confusion. He returned his gaze back to the creator before tilting his head. "I was supposed to let you know. I thought you just wanted me to watch over her." Conan blanched at the interaction. A clone had been in the room the entire time, how had she not noticed? She'd been awake for nearly an hour now. "Are you daft?" Naruto gestured with both hands, clearly annoyed. "I said pop when she's awake. What part about that confused you?" The clone sniffed before turning away, crossing his arms against his chest. "I don't like the way you're speaking to me. You're not gonna like it when I kick your ass either. I'll crush you." The clone responded just as easily, bashing its head against the teen. Conan tilted her head as she watched a man who had beat Nagato argue with himself. How very eccentric. "Ignore him." Tsunade spoke, slowly walking towards Conan's bed, eyes roaming along the various graphs and other medical jargon that the former Akatsuki member didn't understand. "So, how are you feeling?" The paper wielder was silent as she stared at the blonde woman. This was certainly Tsunade Senju. The woman touted as the strongest kunoichi. A woman that Conan admired and looked up to. What female kunoichi didn't look up to Tsunade? She was quite literally what every woman aspired to be. The woman's rather infamous exploits aside, she had paved the way for women in the shinobi-verse. It was incredibly surreal to be here face to face with the woman. None of this showed on her face though. Conan had kept her stone-faced facade up for the better part of 20 years now. Nothing could really get to her nowadays. "I'm fine," she replied monotonously. A delicate eyebrow rose on Tsunade's face. "You're a good liar. Tell me how you really feel though." Conan's eyes narrowed slightly, her head tilting only a fraction to the left. There was an underlying tone to the woman's statement. "Curious. Curious indeed. Physically, I am not fine. Mentally, however, I am." She replied once more, tone bland and devoid of life. The busty woman didn't react to her, eyes still skimming through the various medical jargon. She picked up a random clipboard that held a healthy stack of papers before slowly flipping through them. As a doctor, she finally began. I cannot force you to do anything you don't want to. However, as a fellow Kunoichi who's gone through the loss of multiple loved ones, I advise you to talk about these issues. Perhaps even seek a therapist. Conan was actually taken aback by the woman's sheer bluntness. This was not exactly what she was expecting. I'm aware it's seen as some sort of negative stigma amongst shinobi. The Senju continued, unaware of Conan's thoughts. But talking about your issues can actually help you more than you know. But hey, what do I know? She snorted in an amused manner. It's not like I tried to drink away my problems and run from my past or anything. Trust me, you won't find answers, nor will you heal by staring at the bottom of a liquor bottle. The paper wielder was stunned for all of a half a minute before schooling her thoughts. I've never personally fancied bottles. I will be fine. The Hokage snorted once more, her tone skeptic. Oh, I'm sure you will be. Deciding to cut the conversation short, Tsunade instead sat the clipboard off to the side before leaning back against the counter she placed it on. The little shit arguing with himself over there already told me what happened. I, however, still need to confirm it. So, what happened? And so Conan told her. Explained how the masked man known as Toby came to Omegakure, searching for something. She was intelligent enough to know that Tsunade would already put two and two together regarding the Gado's corpse and the Rinnegan. From there, she went on to explain her fight with the man and how she had thrown caution to wind, using her body and suicide tactics to catch Toby off guard. She revealed the fact that she had planted more than 3 billion explosive tags into the ocean of Omegakure, catching Toby in it and using up the entirety of her massive chakra reserves. Conan ended her tale, explaining how Toby had somehow miraculously survived the billions of explosions, despite knowing how to damage and counter his unique Manjutsu ability. She proceeded to end the story right as Naruto appeared, saving her from dying. Tsunade mulled over the story for several minutes, tapping her fingers against the counter in a steady rhythm. After a few minutes of silence, her honey-brown eyes traveled towards Naruto's position, knowing that the boy had been listening the entire time. What do you think? The blonde teen glanced towards his mother figure before shrugging his shoulders and leaning against the wall. Sounds like he used Izanagi. At the women's questioning stares, he continued. It's an ability that the Uchiha clan possess. They sacrifice one of their eyes and basically rewrite reality. In short, they cheat death with it. It's what Danzo had done with those stolen Sharingan. Tsunade pursed her lips before speaking. And you're absolutely positive you dealt with him? He won't be coming back. The blonde woman immediately saw the way that Conan perked up after her question. It was actually kind of amusing seeing Conan unconsciously lean further in her seated position. Naruto nodded his head in affirmation. Absolutely. It's not like he'd have been able to use Izanagi again. Destroy the eye, deny the ability. He stated nonchalantly with a smile. The Akatsuki is nearly destroyed and all that's left is one or two members. The busty cage released a relieved sigh after the teen's words. Her brown orbs trailed towards Conan and she nearly smirked at how relaxed the woman seemed. Just a minute ago the woman was stiffer than a board, shoulders squared and jaw clenched. With only a few words from Naruto, she had become completely unwound. Deciding to indulge her own self-interests, Tsunade gestured towards Naruto. Good job, my annoying little ninja. Her smile grew at his annoyed expression. I'm going to speak with Shikaku and see if we can't form a task force with the goal of ridding the rest of the Akatsuki. In the meantime however, I'm ordering you to keep watch over our little guest. She glanced towards Conan who still seemed rather relaxed. As much as my favorite troublemaking shinobi vouches for you, you did aid in the death of my former teammate and were one of the main reasons why I lost over 24 shinobi, with one of those being my personal apprentice. Tsunade's polite and friendly demeanor shifted on a dime, becoming something horrendous as she stared directly into Conan's eyes. I want nothing more in this world than to paste your entrails on that wall behind you and stomp directly on your skull, eviscerating your brain matter and turning the rest of you to ashes. The only reason you're not a rotting corpse right now is because of Naruto. Without another word, Tsunade immediately vacated the room, shutting the door with a mighty slam that nearly destroyed the entire wall. A deafening silence permeated the room for several long moments as both shinobi remained silent. Conan's eyes slowly glanced towards her lap and was shocked to see her hands shaking. There is nothing in this world that scares me. But that woman. She terrifies me. I agree, Kurama. Naruto spoke aloud, nervously adjusting the headband that covered his Byakugan. His other orb glanced towards Conan, noticing her confused stare. Oh. I'm talking to my Biju. He was just saying how scary Bachan is. Conan's stoic demeanor cracked as she stared at Naruto like he was insane. You call her that? A nervous laugh escaped him as he continued to fuss with his headband. Well, I've always called her that. We have a unique relationship. Conan's incredulous expression began to slowly disappear as she calmed her raving heart. I should be surprised but I'm not. Heh. He snickered easily. My sensei used to call me Konoha's most unpredictable genin. It still rings true today, I suppose. Pocketing his hands, the boy began to make his way towards the lavender-haired beauty. But enough about that concern marred his features as he stared into her amber orbs. Are you okay? Conan's eyes met his single orb, assessing the expression and glancing away. I've been better. Naruto absent-mindedly nodded his head as he stared at the woman. Something about her was different from the first time he had spoken to her and he just couldn't put his finger on it. His eyes roamed along her delicate features, searching for the reason. Is something wrong? She questioned once noticing his intense stare. Having zoned out at staring at the woman, a hue of red painted his cheeks. Sorry. Something about you is just different. I don't know what it is though. The angel of aim tilted her head before realizing what he meant. My lip piercing weakly raising her index to her bottom lip, she continued. When I left the Akatsuki, I abandoned it. Naruto snapped his fingers with a smile, pointing at the woman. Ah. Now it makes sense. Would you get rid of it? I thought it was pretty cool. Gives you a pretty badass look. Amber Orb stared at the teen for several moments before reverting to the wall beside her. The piercing was symbolic. Nagato and Yahiko. He gestured softly. When she slowly nodded, he continued. Ah, apologies then, if I overstepped any boundaries. It's fine. Conan waved off the apology quietly. It's in the past. I've grieved enough these last 4 years. The Jinchuriki made a noise of surprise. It's been 4 years already. Time flies. His voice wavered off, single eye traveling towards the window of the room. Conan joined him, relishing in the comforting silence. Any tension that remained in her body disappeared as she stared out into the vast village of Konoha. That reminds me. Naruto spoke out of the blue. He unzipped a random pocket of his flak jacket, fishing out an old scroll. Remember that gift you gave me all those years ago? Conan's eyes traveled towards the scroll in question, eyebrows furrowed with a tilted head. Gift. She didn't remember giving Naruto a gift. Yeah. He affirmed with a nod of the head. He unfurled the object before applying a bit of chakra to it. A small cloud of smoke emanated from the parchment, revealing a bundle of paper. Conan's eyes widened immediately upon noticing the object. She was surprised that he kept it after all these years. Naruto placed the scroll back in his flak jacket before gingerly cradling the bouquet of paper flowers. They weren't completely destroyed, but they had definitely seen better days. The roses were crumpled and crushed with the bottom being mangled and slightly torn. They've kinda been torn up since that day 4 years ago. He spoke softly with a slightly apologetic tone. This sounds embarrassing to say, but resisting the urge to twiddle his headband, he continued. Whenever I find myself doubting my abilities and stuff I hold these flowers and think back to what you told me. How you and everyone else in Omegakure believes in me. A soft smile blossomed on his face as he moved towards Conan's position. So, thank you. The blonde placed the nearly ruined bouquet of flowers on Conan's lap, smiling softly as he did so. When he did, Conan's eyes traveled towards his in confusion. Why are you giving me this? She questioned. Naruto was silent, expression conflicted for a few moments. It took several seconds, but he eventually found the words to use. Thanks to my Biju I can sense negative emotions and not to pry or anything, but, you know. You seem to need these more than I do now. His cerulean orb glanced away as he took a step back, allowing Conan to regain her personal space. The lavender-haired beauty stared at Naruto for a moment before glancing down at the flowers she created all those years ago. Her blank facade slowly melted away as she idly fingered the crushed and worn object. A sweet gesture. Naruto was a rather pure individual, which made the guilt of all the things she had inadvertently caused sting just twice as much. She had aided in killing Jiraiya when he came to AIM all those years ago. And while she had been hurt having to fight her former sensei, it was vastly different having to mourn him after the fact. She had helped in killing the man that had saved her life. Jiraiya had taught her how to fend for herself and how to properly fight. And she repaid those teachings by stabbing him in the back. Conan's hands nearly crumpled the bouquet before a hand touched down upon her shoulder. A warm and soothing aura emanated from the gesture as she turned towards its source. Her eyes met Naruto's single orb, and that guilt only seemed to triple. She didn't deserve his forgiveness nor his kindness. It's fine, Conan. He assured her softly. Really, it is. How did he He had already told her he could sense negative emotions. Did that mean he could pinpoint the exact ones? Or was it just anything with negative intent? The full 9 yards. He supplied helpfully. Well, that was certainly unique and unfair. He was incapable of being tricked and or attacked to some degree though. I know, right? Pretty awesome. He spoke up once more, as if reading her thoughts. Conan's eyes narrowed suspiciously as the blonde teen continued to smile at her, staring right into her eyes. He's not reading my mind, right? I'm incapable of reading your mind. Naruto chuckled quietly, ignoring the woman's skeptical stare. Cross my heart and hope to die. I have an easy time reading your face, I dealt with it a lot myself. There was certainly some unspoken words in that sentence, and Conan found herself curious. Why though? Perhaps it was the boredom. Maybe it was the copious amounts of drugs pumping through her veins, numbing her injuries that pushed her to voice her curiosity. And whatever do you mean by that? What do I mean, indeed? He countered easily with a teasing smile. Naruto suddenly walked around the bed and towards the window of the room with his back facing the woman. He stared out into the village for a few moments before speaking. Our shinobi council called for your death, he stated without turning around, absent-mindedly gazing at her from the reflection of the glass pane. I talked them out of it. He became sheepish almost instantly. His words. Forced them to reconsider is the better phrase. The lavender-haired beauty furrowed sure eyebrows, gently moving the old bouquet of flowers to the small table beside her hospital bed. Why did you do so? Naruto's shoulders squared as he spoke, tone firm and unwavering. There's enough death in this world, needlessly adding more to it does not solve issues and only prolongs the negative actions, whether they be intentional or not, disguised as honor or even to avenge. Needless killing solves nothing, and it will never solve the existing issues within our society. Conan took the words to heart. She absolutely believed in them. The Akatsuki had originally been created for the sole purpose of bringing peace and prosperity to a megacure. Yahiko had had talks of doing the same for the entire elemental nations. It was a lofty and idealistic goal that she truly didn't believe in. Up until Uzumaki, Naruto defeated the strongest shinobi to ever walk the elemental nations. Even while crippled, Nagato's incredible power under the 6 paths of pain could have laid ruin to each major village. He had used a Diva path to completely erase Konoha. It wouldn't have been any more effort to completely destroy the other 4 major villages afterwards. But Naruto had defeated Nagato and did the impossible. Conan idly bobbed her head, causing a large portion of her hair to fall directly into her face. Her face scrunched up cutely, annoyance plastering her features. I agree. She stated softly, blowing her fallen bangs away from her face. But what is your first step? Naruto's single eye watched as Conan tried and failed miserably to keep her hair out of her face. It was an oddly adorable sight. He shook those thoughts from his head, centering his gaze on her amber orbs from the reflection. The first step is simple. A pause. In theory at least. The first step is to just talk. The paper wielder abandoned her quest in trying to fix her hair and instead focused on the blonde. About, she ventured curiously. Naruto pursed his lips before shaking his head. The future. He replied in a simple manner. Why should we continue to act out on past grievances with one another? What does that accomplish? What does it truly do for us? He shook his head ruefully. The problem with our society is how barbaric it truly is. Children are taught how to dismember and dismantle one another at the age of 8 years old. I knew how to cut the femoral artery with a kunai to kill a grown man before I learned multiplication. Do our people truly not see how awful it really is? When I was 9 years old in the academy, each kid from my class was given a pet kitten to take care of. We got to take care of it, name it and basically owned it. It was ours. My kitten was my first real friend. His cerulean orb narrowed sadly, falling to the ground. In order to graduate from the academy, each student was asked to bring their pet to school. And in order to fully graduate, we were forced to kill our pet of 3 years with our own bare hands. He shook his head quietly as a hint of disdain entered his voice. They said that killing it would desensitize us and force us to abandon personal feelings in regards to people and things we care about. We were told that a shinobi's only guarantee in life is death, and expecting anything more was foolish. Naruto placed his hand on the glass, shifting his weight onto his right foot. We don't question these things because they are the norm. And it's disgusting. Children have fought in wars that never even involved them. We send them to their deaths before they're able to experience life. And for what? He questioned angrily, slamming his hand against the glass, causing Conan to flinch lightly. Why are children praised for taking lives? As if shinobi propaganda isn't bad enough, these very same children are told that the only way to be a true shinobi is to die fighting for your home. He abruptly turned towards Conan, single cerulean orb flashing crimson as he tried to call himself. The only way to get this to stop is to talk. I'm not naive enough to know that it'll happen immediately. Naruto scoffed quietly, turning his head back towards the window. He placed his arm on the glass before resting his forehead on his appendage, gazing out into the village. It might not even fully happen in my lifetime, but that's the amazing thing about an idea. Men can be killed, but ideas will live forever. The quiet exhale left him, tension slowly draining from his shoulders. If I manage to change even one person's beliefs about our broken society, then I can die happily knowing that someone else will follow in my footsteps. And then that person will inspire others, and then those others will inspire many more. He ended his statement boisterously, banging his fist against the window. A change can't happen until someone decides to step forward, and I'll be the one laying the cement for others to walk upon. And that is a promise. Silence enveloped the room after Naruto's passionate speech. It wasn't an uncomfortable one, far from it, but it was still a very heavy silence. So silent in fact that Naruto became decidedly sheepish due to it. He coughed into his fist awkwardly, shifting back towards Conan's stunned expression. Sorry. I got carried away." The paper wielder shook her head, which was a lot more painful than she could care to admit, and spoke earnestly. "You don't need to apologize, Naruto. Everything about what you said." She paused as she balled her fist in her lap, the action causing her to wince slightly. "I agree and so much more. Jiraiya-sensei and Nagato truly picked the perfect individual for their dream." Naruto averted his gaze bashfully, rubbing the back of his head with a nervous laugh. "Why yeah," he coughed quietly before continuing, trying to turn the tables on Conan. "You said Jiraiya and Nagato, so you don't believe in me?" he asked with a small teasing smile. Conan's stare became flat as she stared into the boy's eye. "The only individuals allowed to seek attention are children. And somehow I am in the presence of a grown one." Naruto guffawed loudly at Conan's insult. "I felt that one deep within my soul. How cruel of you, Conan-chan. However will I recover from this?" A delicate eyebrow rose at the tone of endearment, but Conan ultimately waved it off. Naruto was rather eccentric and unique, and she didn't truly care how he addressed her. "You'll find a way." She spoke softly, releasing a heavy yawn. "You're a tenacious one." Her head began to slowly lower towards the pillow as a wave of exhaustion overcame her. Another yawn left her as she opened her mouth, interrupting her following words. "Get some rest." Naruto spoke softly, interjecting and appearing by her bedside. "We can talk more when you're awake, that is if you want to continue speaking with a grown child." He added with an amused smile. Despite her exhausted and tired state, she still managed to retort softly. "I had two brothers growing up, raising another would be easy." Her eyes immediately slowly closed after her words, not seeing Naruto's grin. The Jinchuriki pulled the woman's covers up past her chest before pulling away. "We'll speaking tomorrow, Conan-chan. Rest up. You earned it." Creating a clone, Naruto nodded at it before disappearing from the room, leaving the clone to watch guard over the former Akatsuki member. Naruto reappeared on a rooftop several buildings away, like of sight facing towards the hospital. He glanced around the rather spacious rooftop before slowly lifting his headband up, revealing his gifted Byakugan. The veins around his right eye bulged, signifying the use of the Dijutsu. "I don't sense anything negative, it seems they're just watching." Granted with near-perfect 360-degree vision, Naruto's Byakugan caught sight of multiple Anbu shinobi surrounding the hospital. There was 10 of them in all, split off into pairs on various different rooftops, all equipped with a line of sight directly into Conan's room. "If they know what's good for them then they'll stop watching," Naruto stated firmly. Despite Conan's past actions, she is no longer an Akatsuki member and is considered a foreign leader. Anything that happens to her here will have political backlash. It doesn't matter if a megacure is small. Doing anything to a foreign delegate, especially to a leader, is bad for business. 5 clones popped into existence behind Naruto before disappearing in a burst of speed. Awfully bold to assume that they'd care. If they touch her then they know what their fate holds. But will their hate consume them? You humans do lack restraint. It won't happen. Naruto stated firmly, arms crossed against his chest. Conan's under my protection. Anyone who touches her has to deal with me. Awfully possessive of you. You have yet to even have a date. Are you not supposed to treat her to dinner first? Skipping first and second base doesn't really seem your style." Naruto's face lit with crimson at the Bijuu's words. "Kurama. It isn't even like that." He whined in an annoyed manner. "We're just friends. You cannot lie to me. We've been over this." Naruto's eyebrow twitched faintly. "You are interested in that mortal." Kurama's words weren't harsh, but they held a tone of something that Naruto couldn't exactly pinpoint. The Jinchuriki sputtered indignantly, shaking his head side to side. "Just because I think she's beautiful doesn't mean I'm interested, Kurama. Continue lying to yourself." The Kyuubi snorted, laying his head down upon its massive hand like claws. "Life is too short to live with regrets. Enjoy things as they are, Naruto. You are a human. Indulge yourself. You deserve it." Naruto's eyebrows furrowed at his partner's words. That was surprisingly amazing advice. "I always give good advice. You, however, are too stupid to take it. That is not my problem. Take my advice or not. I don't care. I'm done speaking now. Don't bother me." Naruto made it face at Kurama's parting words, but didn't challenge them. He was silent for several minutes before slowly walking towards the edge of the building. He sat down on the edge before staring directly at the hospital. His Byakugan was still active, allowing him to see Conan's chakra system. Naruto continued to stare for several minutes before sighing quietly and deactivating his Dijutsu, covering it up like his former sensei. "She's beautiful, sure, but could we know?" he denied almost instantly. It wouldn't work. For the remainder of the day and even late into night, Naruto would watch over Conan. Fake scenarios involving the woman and himself floated in and out of his thoughts, occupying him the entire time. And if he was being honest, he rather fancied them. Konan was a rational woman. And any rational woman, in her position at least, knew that her days were numbered. She'd gone through a bevy of hardships and turmoil growing up. She never thought that she'd be the most wanted woman in the elemental nations at the age of 26. Never could have fathomed that she'd take part in the greatest catastrophe to hit a major village since the 4th Hokage's decimation of Iwagakure's army. Aiding Nagato in completely leveling an entire major village hadn't necessarily been a part of her lifelong plan of following her brother in all but blood, but here she was resting and recovering in a hospital bed that belonged to the very village she had ultimately torn down. Naruto, or his clone rather, had pulled the window back to allow some sun in the room and she had immediately gotten sick from it. It had been 4 years since that devastation, and though the village had rebuilt a lot, the scars from Nagato's attack still remained. Gone was the immense outer walls and gates that protected the massive village, and its place were walls nearly half the size. Though Konan had noticed multiple scaffolding across the walls, as if the shinobi and villagers were restoring the village to its former glory. Konan had requested the clone to keep the window closed, and thankfully he never broached the subject or objected to her desire. He was such a pure soul, nearly too kind for his own good. Naruto reminded her of a child, to some degree. Not because of his eccentric personality and odd way of doing things, but because of his heart. There was an innocence to it which was vexing due to the blood that coated his hands. Naruto's name was just as revered through the elemental nations as it was for being feared. This was the same child that strong-armed the Yondaime Reikage into submission against a leaf for Sasuke Uchiha's actions. Naruto had beaten and dragged the muscular and rowdy man through the streets of Kumagakure, all whilst spouting that rogue nin of Konoha were their responsibility. He went on to hunt and exterminate the remaining members of the Akatsuki, one by one. While Konan had already fled from the group, denouncing her status as a member, she had kept up with their actions. She had even feared that Naruto would one day come after her for her involvement, but he never did. First he started with Deidara and then moved on to Kisame. Itachi, Haiden and Kakazu had already been taken down prior to the boys' hunt, but she knew that the boy had been involved in their death somehow. Sasori had fallen victim to one of his teammates, but she was certain that he had crippled the puppeteer during their first exchange before going after Deidara for extracting the Ichibi from the Kazekage. And now with Tobi's death, the only remaining Akatsuki member was Zetsu. The creature had always been elusive and even Konan didn't believe it was human. There was something sick about Zetsu that she just couldn't comprehend. She had always felt her skin crawl when the thing was near her. Konan hoped that Naruto would eliminate it soon. Just the thought of that create. She paused for a brief moment. Hope. She was beginning to do a lot of that lately, hoping to recover soon. Hoping to find strength through her companion, Naruto. Hope. She had never done so when she was alive, or rather, before her near death at Tobi's hands. She had abandoned hope when she was a child. But somehow, Naruto was giving her hope. Perhaps it was just hero worship. The boy did save her life after all, yes, that was it. Just a bit of hero worship. There was nothing existential going on that she could ascertain. At least she hoped that was the case, and there she goes again with this hope nonsense. Naruto had had an interesting couple of days since rescuing Konan in Imegakure. He had been watching over her for the past week and some change and it was, how should he put it, enlightening, pleasant, nice. Nice seemed too simple. Konan was great company even if she didn't really talk. Not that she really needed to. Naruto had always been good at dealing with individuals who dealt in micro-expressions rather than words. His brief stint in the Anbu under Tsunade had him dealing directly with the emotionally inept soldiers of Konoha. Those 2 years had been interesting, but it was a life he didn't wish to return to. The Anbu were regimented in a way that seemed nearly religious, and he hated being locked in routine. He needed to be free. To be able to do his own thing. And relieve his mom of the burden of being Hokage. Not because he wanted to be the Hokage, but because she didn't want to be it anymore. The position had held a warm place in his heart when he was younger because it was a goal bred from selfish desires. Naruto wanted to be the Hokage so that people would finally see him. Not because he wanted to protect the village. Not because he viewed everyone as family. But because it would force the village to acknowledge him. It had taken several years, but he had finally grown out of that childish belief. He didn't need acknowledgement from anyone or anything. The only thing that mattered was his happiness. Would being Hokage make him happy? Not even a little. Would relieving Tsunade of being the Hokage make him happy? Absolutely. Weird logic, but it made sense to him, and that's all that really matters. A sudden influx of information spread throughout his mind, causing him to smile in an amused manner. What was the cause? Apparently Konan had finally grew tired of his clone's childish games and had abruptly popped up with a paper shuriken. Reliving his clone's final moments had been incredibly amusing. Without a thought, another clone popped into existence behind him before disappearing to watch over the woman. If this clone was smart, it had learned from its past predecessor. Shaking his head, Naruto folded the papers in his hands before placing them in a manila folder and sealing them away. He tucked the thick parchment into a hidden compartment under his desk before slowly rising and stretching his joints. A knock from the front of his house, one he sensed several minutes prior to, caused him to release a quiet sigh. The broad-shouldered teen slowly maneuvered through his rather barren home, reaching the door and opening it without bothering to check who was there. Took your time. The distinct stench of cigarettes and cheap alcohol was a giveaway. Busy. The Jinchuriki leaned against his doorway, crossing his arms against his chest and raising an eyebrow. Always busy, he began slowly, inwardly smiling at his friend's annoyed expression. But for you Shika, I'm way too busy. Naruto made to close the door in the shadow user's face, but ultimately failed due to said shadow manipulator manipulating said shadows to prevent his door from being closed. I thought for sure that'd work, Naruto commented dejectedly. When did you get not lazy? It's so unlike you Shika. The chain-smoking Jonin lazily flicked the ashes off his addiction before gesturing with his head. Tsunade-sama says you're building a task force for the remaining Akatsuki members. Naruto feigned ignorance. Did she now? That's weird. Shikamaru's unamused expression did wonders for Naruto's happiness. The fact I let you get under my skin shows how dumb I really am. The Nara sighed quietly while shaking his head, cigarette tucked into the corner of his mouth. So, we doing this or not? The blonde teen offered a smirk to his best friend. Come on, Shika. What are brothers for? The lazy teen swerved away from the blonde's hand, already knowing that Naruto was going to do something stupid and choosing to avoid it. We're not related. You're dumb and I'm smart. He paused for a moment, the beginnings of a smile tugging at his features. I'm also way better looking. Let's ask Temari that then. Naruto fired back immediately with a smirk. I'm absolutely positive she'd say me. Shikamaru stated with 100% confidence. Naruto only stared at him with a raised eyebrow. Shikamaru faltered. Yeah, that's what I thought. The Jinchuriki chuckled while slowly stepping out of his home. Come on. Let's go get Sai. Naruto and Shikamaru walked through the village, heading towards Ino's home. She lived on the most eastern side of the village, and therefore their journey was a long one due to Naruto's insistence on staying on the edge of the village. What do you know about Zetsu? Shikamaru questioned as he pulled out an old and rusty lighter. He flipped the top, fanning the flames for his cigarette before pocketing it. The teen took a long draft, glancing at his blonde companion. Or is this gonna be one of those wing it 'cause I'm strong missions? Naruto shrugged his shoulders, pocketing his hands lazily. Not a lot. He was the Akatsuki's information gatherer. Apparently he's undetectable, or so Konan-chan says. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow at the affectionate suffix used for the infamous woman. He didn't pursue that particular train of thought and instead continued to smoke his cigarette. What Naruto did in his personal life was on him. Shikamaru wanted no part of it. Well, to some extent. Naruto was his best friend these days. Assume his death had been a bitter pill to swallow, and he hadn't been able to believe it. Choji's death barely a year later had nearly broken him. Team 9 had always been a close bunch. Nearly family in all but name, but these days not so much. He and Ino had grown apart since their sensei and teammate's death. It wasn't necessarily out of malice or dislike, but more because the two of them had never chosen to reach out to one another. Ino found comfort in Sai and Shikamaru had confided in his then girlfriend and now wife, Temari. They were still on amicable terms with one another though, but they weren't a brother and sister they used to be. Shikamaru sighed quietly to himself, eyes lazily glancing towards the clouds. Perhaps he should reach out, but then he'd have to deal with Ino's emotions, and that was just far too troublesome. Not a word, Naruto. Shikamaru grumbled quietly, already knowing about Naruto's ability to sense negative emotions. I don't want to hear it. The aforementioned teen only raised his hands in defense. I wasn't gonna say anything. He received a disbelieving expression. I swear. Shikamaru continued to stare, and Naruto faltered. That's what I thought. The Nara nodded, exhaling the smoke from his lungs. I'll reach out eventually. One day. Most likely. Eventually. Probably. Keep telling yourself that. Naruto commented while rolling his eyes. But it shouldn't be too hard to find Zetsu. Shikamaru only offered a quiet grunt. A grunt that conveyed the unasked question. Because I can make 20,000 clones using Kurama's chakra to hunt him down. I bet we'll find him in a day. Naruto supplied optimistically. And if we don't? Shikamaru asked, flicking the ashes off his dwindling cigarette. Then I'll just start throwing around Bijudamas. The blonde replied with a terrifying smile. Either we find him or I destroy the world. You can't hide if the planet stops existing. Please don't joke like that. Shikamaru stated seriously, already opening a new carton of cigarettes. You know I stress smoke. An annoying guffaw of laughter replied to Shikamaru. It made him want to strangle the blonde. Naruto was so annoying. The two continued to idly bicker with anyone, trading barbs and jokes like any pair of brothers would do. It continued for several minutes before Shikamaru finally decided to satiate his curiosity. So, Konan-chan. He broached lazily, hands slowly entering his pockets. You and Conan close. Naruto glanced towards the Nara for a brief moment, single eye burrowing a hole into the boy's skull. For a moment it was a brief moment. But for a single moment, Shikamaru could swear he saw something disgusting. There was something insidious in that blank gaze of his. It was fleeting, and had Shikamaru been a lesser man, he'd have curled in on himself. Then the moment passed. The lazy smile framed Naruto's face afterwards. One that didn't alleviate the uncomfortable feeling in Shikamaru's bones. Just friends. The emptiness bore through Shikamaru, and it was only his ironclad will that prevented him from flinching. Why? What brought this on? Shikamaru pointedly decided to end the conversation right there. Something told him that if he continued to push the subject that he wouldn't like the outcome. So, he turned his gaze forward and faked confidence he didn't truly have. Not that it'd matter in the end. Naruto could sense fear after all. Nothing. Shikamaru replied lazily. Just curious. Naruto only hummed quietly, and Shikamaru couldn't fathom how such a sound could come across so terrifying. But it seemed that fate smiled upon the Nara. Naruto didn't push the subject, and Shikamaru vowed to never bring it up again. 10 minutes passed by in relative silence as both friends entered through the Yamanaka compound. A brief run-in with the guards and caretakers had kept them occupied for a few minutes. After dealing with them, the two stepped up to Ino's home. Naruto rose his hand before rapidly knocking on the door, stepping back and waiting for the shitshow to officially commence. This is going to be incredibly annoying. Shikamaru drawled, leaning against one of the beams of wood. Naruto stepped away from the door, grimacing quietly to himself. Oh, I know. It didn't take long for a reply. The scream was muffled, but Shikamaru and Naruto easily deciphered the words. Ino called Naruto a cunt. The door swung open with a vengeance, Ino's angered visage on display. What? She roared loudly. Naruto inwardly complained to himself, she was already angry. Just great. Hey Ino, how are you doing? He instead asked awkwardly. Ino's turquoise eyes zeroed in on Naruto, ascertaining the situation instantly. Kill yourself. Her gaze then swiveled towards Shikamaru. Ino's expression slowly became unreadable as she stared at her former teammate. Several beats of silence followed before the woman spoke, tone devoid of emotion. Hello, traitor. Fancy seeing you here considering, you know, that you're a traitor. So, what can I, Ino Yamanaka, the only loyal shinobi still alive from the former Team 9, do for you, Shikamaru Nara, the awful traitorous bastard who let our sensei's killer go? Even Naruto cringed at the woman's words. It was a low blow and she knew it. No one alive would ever say that Ino couldn't verbally box with the best. If she wanted to hurt you then she would. This was a battle that Naruto wanted zero part in. He knew of the volatile history that Shikamaru and Ino possessed. His friend always seemed to downplay their relationship, almost blind to the sheer venom that his former teammate felt regarding his actions years ago. Well, Shikamaru wasn't necessarily blind, he just chose to push it aside. Ignoring it as if it didn't exist. Not like he was the same either. Ino hated his guts, and when he had tried to explain his reasonings, she told him that the only way she'd forgive him was if he committed seppuku. The Nara, once again choosing to ignore the absolute venom being spewed in his face, spoke lazily. We're looking for Sai. Hokage-sama's orders. Naruto just shook his head, rubbing his face with his left hand. Kami, damn it, Shikamaru. Why? The smile immediately blossomed on the Yamanka's face. It was not a nice one. Oh. She spoke with false enthusiasm. That's great. You need Sai. That's crazy. She spoke, drawing out the A's intentionally. I needed him too when my best friend abandoned me in my time of need too. Did you need anything else? I'd love to accommodate you. That was a lie, and it didn't take negative emotion sensing to understand that. Naruto decided to finally interject, he spoke quietly, drawing attention to himself. Hey Ino, we're just here for a quick mission. So, you know. The woman's gaze swiveled back to her fellow blonde. Ino's ire focused directly on the teen, and she didn't even bother hiding the genuine anger in her eyes. And look what we have here. She gestured with her hands, fingers splayed towards the Jinchuriki. The one who let my best friend's death go in vain. How are you doing, Naruto? Been good. Eating well. Heard a rumor that you got a new girlfriend. I'm so happy for you. Her expression began to slowly cool, blue eyes becoming dark and her tone anything but warm. Get the fuck off my property. I don't ever want to see your fucking faces in my compound again. Take your orders and shove them up your fucking ass. She stepped back towards her home, nearly slamming the door before speaking once again. Actually, do everyone a fucking favor and slit your throat. Maybe then you'll understand why I, and so many others, fucking hate you. Ino then proceeded to slam the door shut, nearly blasting the entire frame with her strength. Naruto and Shikamaru just stood on the porch awkwardly, neither speaking to one another. A few seconds passed by before the two teens heard Sai speak, his voice muffled by the wall separating them. They heard Ino's screams though. And she was not happy. Another minute passed by before the door slowly opened, Sai slowly coming into view. His pale visage was as blank as ever and his eyes conveyed nothing. He shut the door behind him, turning his gaze onto the two men before speaking. My wife hates both of you and if you died today then she'd happily piss on your graves. He spoke as bluntly as ever, not bothering to mince words. Her words not mine. He added momentarily. However, her beliefs are her own and does not dictate what I personally believe. What is our mission? Conan's arm began to itch. Her amber orbs traveled towards her appendage as she stared at it. A blink. There was a phantom feeling there. Almost like it was supposed to do something. Another itch. Another blink. What was going on? You okay, Conan-chan? Amber orb swiveled towards her savior, noticing the concern fixed on his visage. I can't move my arm, Conan stated quietly, averting her gaze. The clone blinked before slowly making its way towards her bedside. He slowly took a seat beside her bed before gesturing with his hand. May I? Conan nodded once, allowing the clone permission. Naruto's hands gently gripped the appendage, fingertips softly dancing upon her skin. His fingers would occasionally apply pressure in certain parts, searching for something. But Conan wasn't focusing on that. She was more so focused on how warm those hands were. The hospital was barely 60 degrees. It was like fire upon her skin. A pleasant one though. One she didn't really mind. Conan. Naruto spoke, trying to get the woman's attention. The woman was brought out of her thoughts at the amused expression of her companion. She blinked a single time before humming quietly, confused. I asked you if you could move your fingers. His amused smile never left his face. The paper wielder found herself averting her gaze, focusing on the white sheets of the hospital bed. Had she really been so lost in her thoughts? And why did her cheeks feel so warm? She shook those thoughts from her head before doing as asked. Her fingers began to slowly clasp and before she could form a fist, a white hot fire emanated near her forearm. A quiet hiss exited through her clenched teeth, eye wincing shut. Naruto muttered quietly, slowly turning the woman's arm over so her palm was facing the ceiling. His fingertips slowly glided over her porcelain skin, gently massaging the muscle of her forearm. Conan proceeded to release a soothing sigh, eyes unconsciously shutting at the gentle ministrations. A quiet grunt escaped her as the man's gestures became rougher. It wasn't painful, far from it. It was actually incredibly pleasing and Conan found herself relaxing further into her bed. As quick as it came, it went. And Conan nearly berated herself for almost whining at the loss of contact. She wanted more, damn it. There you go. Naruto stated with a smile, fingers slowly pulling away. Try clenching your fist. Conan's eyes slowly opened, sliding to the teen at first before falling to her arm. She began to clench her fist, muscles protracting at the action. She successfully balled her fist and while she felt her forearm slightly tense up, it was better than the pain from before. Every hour or so, clench and unclench your fists in 2-minute intervals. Naruto spoke up, smile framing his handsome features. If it happens again, just let me know. He made to stand from his seat but was prevented from doing so due to the hand that gripped his shirt. His lone orb swung to the woman, spying her expressionless face. No words were spoken. The two continued to stare at one another before Naruto offered a gentle smile. He proceeded to sit back down, acting as if nothing happened. Conan was thankful for it. The door to her room was abruptly opened and Conan found herself not tensing up. Her eyes did however shoot towards the door and she spotted several shinobi following in behind Naruto. She vaguely recognized them but couldn't place names to their faces. Oh Conan-chan. The woman's eyes met Naruto's single orb. She tipped her head politely, speaking softly. Naruto. Such was their routine. One she didn't truly mind. Naruto glanced towards his clone, subtly signaling towards it. For what, Conan didn't truly know. Her face betrayed nothing as she spotted the way his eye tightened on her face. What was happening? Was something wrong? Her stomach coiled tightly, anxiety threatening to pervade her veins. Did he finally come to his senses? Had her luck truly run out? She wouldn't fight it if it did come. It wouldn't do her any good anyway. Naruto outclassed her in every possible way. He'd dismantle her without so much as a thought and break no sweat. She was still recovering and was essentially bedridden. Depressed thought circulated her mind at the thought. She had been told by Naruto himself that she was nearly ready to start walking. Or rather, that she'd be able to go outside for fresh air in a wheelchair. Which was better than sitting in this stuffy room for all hours of the day. It beat having Naruto having to aid her in using the bathroom. That was an event she would happily erase from her mind. He didn't seem to have minded all that much and had made light of the situation. Conan blinked as the negative thoughts began to slowly dissipate and in their place, positive ones. She felt a pressure on her arm and looked down to see Naruto's hand there, gently gripping the appendage. You okay? He asked softly while rubbing her forearm, knowing that she rarely stretched the muscles despite he and his clone telling her to do so. Conan's gaze found his as she stared into his single cerulean orb. She was silent for a moment, betraying nothing. I am now. She answered simply. His smile returned full force as he gently stroked her arm. His hand left her a moment later and she had to physically stop her bottom lip from protruding. Conan did not pout. She was a grown woman who had taken lives. A criminal of the highest degree. Pouting was beneath her. Unpouting? Naruto teased with a smile. How'd he know? The Jinchuriki chuckled loudly before taking the seat near her bedside, allowing her to gaze at the individuals that had followed in behind him. Noticing her gaze, Naruto gestured with his hand towards the shinobi in the room. He started from left to right, naming them as he did. This is Niji of the Hyuga clan, Shikamaru of the Nara clan and Sai. He introduced. She was well aware of the hidden animosity that swam through the Hyuga's eyes. The boy did well to conceal his displeasure and anger, but she could see right through it. The other two men seemed neutral towards her, if not uncaring. Naruto must have noticed the Hyuga's growing anger and spoke. You're wondering why we're here, yeah? He asked rhetorically, not really waiting for Conan to reply. Bach-an finally gave me the green light to hunt down Zetsu. We're here for any extra information you have on him. Conan raised a single eyebrow, staring into Naruto's eye. I've given you everything I truly know about him. There isn't much else I can provide. Naruto waved her answer off with ease. I know. It's just procedure. If I don't so it then Bach-an complains, and I don't want to hear it. Her eyebrows furrowed for a brief moment. Something was bothering Naruto. Had she not spent the last 3 weeks in this bed with him and his clones, she wouldn't have really noticed. But his bottom lip had curled when he spoke. His tone, while jovial, was tired. And the fact his eye would tighten when looking at her was telling. Conan didn't feel any negativity at the gesture, but there was certainly something wrong. She wanted to ask if something was wrong, but with so many strangers here, she didn't necessarily fancy the idea of doing so. Are you leaving now? She instead asked, tone almost devoid of emotion. And Naruto was the only one to catch it. His visible eye softened as he glanced at her. He offered a genuine smile as he answered. Yeah, I'll probably be gone for a week or two. I'll try and get back as quick as I can. Depends on how easy Zetsu is to find. Conan didn't really have an answer to that. For the last 3 weeks Naruto or his clone had been at her side, watching over her and providing comfort. She didn't really like the idea of being alone again. In fact, she hated it. Despised it and absolutely loathed it. Ever since Nagato and Yahiko had offered their goodbyes, she'd been terrified of having to be alone again. They'd left her once before and had to do so again. And now Naruto was leaving too. She was aware that she was using Naruto as a safety net and that it was becoming increasingly unhealthy, but damn it, she deserved to be selfish. For so much of her life she had been following others. Looking at the backs of the people she loved and cared for. Never questioning the actions and decisions of the ones she admired. It just wasn't fair. She didn't want to be alone. She didn't want to endure the silence of this room any longer. It was gnawing at her. Conan wanted to be outside to feel the gentle breezes of air as it swept through her short hair. And dare she say it, she wanted to feel the rain of aim on her skin. Conan's head lolled forward, bangs shadowing her face. Her mouth slowly opened and closed multiple times, struggling to voice her desire. Say it. Her face scrunched up tightly as she licked her lips. She spoke quietly, noticing that the men in the room had stopped talking, their attention now solely on her. It caused her to falter. Say it. Conan just needed to push. To keep going. Just say the words. Just say it. She stuttered weakly, face tightening in anger as she mentally berated herself. Say it. Need she struggled immensely, fists clenching in anger and shame. Why couldn't she just say it? What was stopping her? Just say it. Why are you hesitating? Be safe, she eventually mumbled out quietly. Howard. Naruto tilted his head as the woman's negative emotions practically screamed at him. Conan, are you? He was cut off by the woman's abrupt answer. Yes. I'm fine. She answered curtly, eyes refusing to gaze at the man. She once again paused, as if trying to say something. I'm fine. Just go. She couldn't see Naruto's face and missed the way his eyes narrowed sadly. The blonde sat quietly for several moments before he slowly rose from his seat. His hands fidgeted awkwardly, fighting the urge to stroke the woman's arm. He eventually decided against it and sighed quietly before moving away. Okay, he replied quietly as he fidgeted with his headband. Yeah. He paused before shaking his head. I'll be back, get some rest. Conan cringed at his words, but she didn't look up. She didn't want to look at his face. She remained silent as the door opened, hearing the footsteps of the men as they slowly exited her room. There was a pause from the last man, that man definitely being Naruto. She didn't know what he was doing, but eventually the man just sighed quietly before exiting the room. A second later she heard the distinct sound of his shadow clone popping. The room was completely silent save for the soft beeping emanating from the monitor hooked up to her. She hated it. Alone once more, and this time it had been her fault. No existential forces working against her, she alone had fucked it up. All she had to do was say 5 words. 5 simple words. And she couldn't even do that. Stupid. Useless. She mentally berated herself. Her hands came up to her head as her knees slowly pulled to her chest. Her fingers grasped her lavender tresses as she roughly pulled. Coward. Useless, spineless coward. It's all you're ever going to be. Conan ignored the tears that fell down her face. She wanted to just scream, to thrash about like a child and hit something. Why? Why? Why hadn't she just said what she desired? Why did she hesitate? And look what happened. She had clearly hurt Naruto. And all he had been trying to do was help her. And she practically spit in his face. Her frustration boiled over into anger, and Conan found herself flinging paper shurikens into the wall. The unique jutsu tore through the walls, shredding them and leaving gaping holes in the plaster. Conan's tantrum continued for the next half hour as she flung her shurikens around the room, not caring for the destruction she was causing. She sent one final shuriken into the cabinet, watching as it practically exploded due to the force of her throw. She heaved heavily, head becoming light before succumbing to a vicious coughing fit. Her hands enclosed around her mouth as she felt liquid crash into her palms. Blood began to slowly seep through her fingers, dripping onto her hospital gown and down her arms. Conan grimaced as she pulled her hands away, staring at the crimson liquid with blurry eyes. Her chest was on fire and her arms ached painfully. Fatigue and exhaustion began to finally set in, and Conan was incapable of fighting it. As her eyes slowly closed, she spoke the 5 words she had wanted to say to Naruto. I need you to stay. Why was the life of a shinobi full of strife and pain? Full of sacrifice and vengeance? Plagued by hate and death? Propaganda and mantras of village worship brainwash those with weak minds. Humans are a frightful creature, terrified of the unknown and full of spite to those they perceive as better. For what does man do to those they fear? The sad reality that only progressively worsens when power is thrown into the mix. If you lacked power in the elemental nations, then you lacked a true voice. Words are meaningless until you decide to take action. The Yondaime Raikage had learned that lesson the hard way. While Naruto had been young and immature, more so than the now Atlas, he had understood that he lacked a soapbox when speaking to the veteran Raikage. The burly man had sidelined him and demeaned him. And because of this, Naruto had retaliated. By dragging the man through his very own village, he had essentially sparked what would have been a war. A war that Kumo would have lost regardless. Regardless of the countless lives of shinobi that were lost due to Nagato's attack, Naruto was a one-man army. He didn't need help to decimate hundreds of forces and battalions of shinobi. If he had the power to throttle the fastest shinobi alive with but a few punches, then what could he do to third-rate shinobi? Power was not a blessing despite how many believed the exact opposite. Strength did not cement ideals and only seemed to further perpetuate the negative ideals that claimed the shinobi world. It only took having near-infinite chakra reserves and jutsus that could topple mountains for Naruto to truly understand that. Individuals he'd never know would look at him with either fear or admiration. Envy and hate. It left a hollow hole in his being. He was no longer a person to these people. Being a Jinchuriki didn't help, and he'd always accepted the fact that he'd been a weapon. But being called a weapon was better than being looked at like an anomaly. You've been down this entire time. Something you want to talk about? Naruto didn't bother glancing at his friend as he responded. Shitty childhood and whatnot. Just the normal things. Shikamaru knew his friend was being dismissive. Normally I'd accept that pitiful excuse, but not this time. It's deeper than that, Naruto. This time, Naruto finally managed an annoyed glance at his friend. Why did he have to use his name? I don't need a therapist right now. He grunted out quietly, leaning back against the tree he was seated in front of. Let me internalize my trauma. Alone. The Nara didn't retaliate, already knowing a lost cause when he saw one. The genius instead flicked out a carton of cigarettes, fingering 2 of them and throwing one of them to his blonde friend. Lighting his addiction, he spoke quietly. I'm gonna regret this, but I need to satisfy my curiosity. He exhaled the soothing tobacco, eyes straying towards the stars as he spoke. How come you don't hate Conan? If Neji and Sai were quiet before, then they were absolutely silent now. Naruto's eye drifted down toward the cigarette in his fingers before placing it in between his lips. A minor application of Kaiten chakra sparked the tobacco as he inhaled the addictive substance. Exhaling the smoke through his nostrils, the Jinchuriki side-eyed his best friend. Why should I? Conan isn't the one who destroyed Konoha. But she did help. Shikamaru supplied. Nara couldn't fathom the blonde's nonchalance about the woman. She was directly responsible for Sakura's death and countless other Konoha shinobi. Both of his teachers had even been claimed by the organization that she helped create. Naruto closed his eye, shuffling the cigarette to the corner of his lips. He was silent for several minutes, contemplating the words and how he wished to say them. He eventually found them, taking the cigarette out of his mouth and ashing it out against the wood of the tree. Contrary to what you believe, I used to hate her. And any rational person would as well after everything she's done. But what does this accomplish in the grand scheme of things? Will my hate bring back Kakai-sensei? Hiro-sennin? Hinata? Hell, even Sakura herself. He tilted his head back down, cerulean orb staring into Shikamaru's. Would killing her soothe the pain in your heart over Asuma and Choji's death? Would it truly make you feel better if you slit her throat? He gave his friend a hard stare before glancing away and continuing. I hated Konan just as much as I hated Nagato, and if I'm being honest, I still hate Nagato. I wanted nothing more than to crush his skull in between my hands, but again, would that bring back the hundreds of people who died that day? Why are shinobi so obsessed with death and vengeance? His tone became slightly acidic towards the end. Why can't we just forgive and forget? You burden yourself when you allow hate to grip you. I should know this more than anyone. The real question you should be asking me is why are you still a loyal shinobi to Konoha? After all, what did this village do for me? I could have turned out to be just like Gaara, slaughtering those who annoyed me and murdering just because. So let me ask you a question, Shika. Why must we hate those who have wronged us? Neji finally spoke up, tone devoid of emotion as he did so. You would be so callous as to ignore the feelings of those personally affected by the atrocities the Akatsuki committed. People are allowed to hate who they choose to. Just because you do not does not mean others have to share your beliefs. The Jinchuriki scoffed quietly, crossing his arms against his chest and replying. When did I say that others should follow my beliefs, Neji? It is asinine. The Hyuga retorted, ignoring Naruto's question. We're allowed to be angry and frustrated. And how we grieve is up to us. I hate that woman for the sole reason that many of my family perished due to her actions and involvement. Is that eye in your socket just a trophy to be reminded of every time you fall asleep? Did Hinata-sama deserve to die because of you, Naruto? A brief surge of anger entered through Naruto's veins at Niji's question. He stamped it down just as fast. Don't talk about Hinata. He warned harshly. Niji ignored the warning. Or what? You'll fight me? Beat me? Succumb to your base instincts? I'm asking you a question in the same vein as Shikamaru. You would get angry and respond with violence for something you perceive as negative. You are human just as much as we are. Naruto just stared at the man, frustration threatening to boil over. A biting retort found its way to his tongue as he spoke. I find that very ironic coming from you. Didn't you try to murder Hinata during the Chunin exams? Who are you to try to take a moral high ground with me? I choose to not hate Konan. At the end of the day, everything we feel, say and do is a choice. Niji's eyes narrowed as he turns his gaze upon the blonde. He was seconds away from replying before the other individual in their group finally made himself known. In hopes of avoiding potential death due to mundane topics, Sai finally interjected, drawing attention to himself. We should be focusing on our objective. The man's charcoal gaze landed on Naruto as he spoke. No one here wants to fight with you, Naruto. We, and by we I mostly mean they, are allowed the right to be bothered and angry due to Konan's actions. Just as you were allowed to be angry and bothered by Sasuke and his actions. We aren't your enemy here and only wish for you to see things from our perspective. Not every person thinks the same and feels the same, it is why humans are unique. Naruto mulled over Sai's words but in the end, said nothing in response to the man's words. For the remainder of their mission, silence was the only thing that emanated from the quartet. Each man had said their piece that night and no other words were deemed necessary. Out of anger, resentment, and our inability to empathize with one another was unknown. The next 2 weeks would pass by tensely. A friendship that would slowly fracture due to different ideals. You do know that we have to repair these damages, correct? And I'm not just talking about your damages either. Konan would have sighed if she could. The breathing tube currently stuffed down her throat prevented this. Regardless, she didn't want to hear it. Worst of all, it was coming from a slightly irate Tsunade. The same woman who had threatened to crush her skull a few days ago. Yeah, her. Tsunade held a clipboard in her hand, pen scribbling against the parchment on the piece of wood. Why did you get so angry anyway? Little shit says you're usually level-headed. Little shit was most definitely Naruto, Konan mused silently to herself. Regardless, she wouldn't be able to answer the question anyway. She couldn't really speak. You know sign language? The buxom woman asked curiously, slender eyebrow raised. Konan's eyebrows furrowed minutely at the question before she slowly and weakly raised her hands, making slow motions in the air. I do, actually. The Hokage nodded her head before gesturing with her clipboard to the destruction that Konan had caused in the room. Well? She asked expectantly. A minor grimace overtook Konan's features, one that she revealed unintentionally. These damn drugs were messing with her cognitive functions. I was upset. Tsunade snorted, gently kicking a piece of one of the various cabinets in the room. Well, yes, I can see that. But why were you upset? She paused for a moment before tilting her head with a certain glint in her eyes. Did your little boyfriend anger you before leaving on his mission? He'll be back eventually, you know. Konan's cheeks dashed red despite herself. Damn it. More emotions. Stop it. Oh. How cute. The blonde Senju mocked quietly, scribbling away on her clipboard. Enemies turned to lovers. She snorted in amusement before continuing. Kinda like a cheesy romance novel that women in their mid-40s read. But I'm surprised, Conan. Usually women like you prefer older men, but we all got our preferences, huh? He's only half your age after all. Conan's eyebrow twitched angrily at the absurd notion of her and Naruto being together. We are not lovers. I never said you were lovers though. Tsunade teased in amusement, wagging her index finger like an annoying parent. But I don't blame you though. He's strong. Brave. He saved your life right as you think you're about to die. Hell, he's even a good-looking kid. She shrugged nonchalantly, placing the clipboard on Conan's bed. And you don't seem to really mind his presence, unlike many others who've come through here. Even carries on your ideals to a certain degree, gotta be some bonus points right there. Conan could not and did not refute the woman's words despite how much she wanted to. Tsunade had hit the nail on nearly every point. But what do I know? My lover died before we could make it truly official, and I proceeded to wallow in misery and sadness for the remainder of my life, staving off relationships and intimacy due to internal fears of losing my loved ones. The blonde woman stared directly into Conan's amber eyes as she spoke, never breaking eye contact. What do I truly know, hey? It could have been the drugs running rampant through Conan's veins, but Tsunade's words seemed to hint at something else. And that something else was beginning to unnerve Conan. I don't understand. Tsunade raised an eyebrow at her non-verbal words. You don't understand or you don't want to understand. Oh no, oh no, no, no. This conversation was headed into a very dangerous direction, and Conan wanted absolutely no part in it. Nope. Not even a little. She shook her head, grunting in pain from the action and clenching her eyes shut. Oh wow, Tsunade commented with a raised brow, staring at the woman as she squirmed in pain. I was only semi-joking with you. Are you actually attracted to Naruto? No. Conan vehemently denied as she grunted in pain once more. Her chest heaved painfully as her arms fell back on the bed. She couldn't fathom the reasoning on why her cheeks felt so warm at the moment. Tsunade gave the woman a hard stare. One amalgamated by years of maternal love and care for a son that was not technically hers. And that stare was absolutely terrifying. Conan did not like it one bit. Not at all. Keep telling yourself that. The woman eventually spoke, averting her gaze to the window of the hospital room. The first step is denial. Once you get over that hurdle, then you enter the forbidden territory known as shame. Shame? Conan questioned internally. Why would she? Tsunade slowly crept towards the window of the room, pulling the curtain back and staring out into the village. Of course, in your unique circumstance you'd succumb to the acceptance of the idea, but the inability to act on your emotions. Thus, you bottle it up until it explodes. She spun on her heel, gazing into the woman's amber orbs. But again, what do I know? It's not like I went through this exact scenario years ago. A rather sad smile formed on the blonde woman's face as she leaned against the window. She crossed her arms against her chest before speaking bitterly. Except the man I fell for died before I could let him know how much he truly meant to me. Tsunade let the silence hang for several moments, ignoring Conan's rather shell-shocked expression. She eventually shrugged her shoulders before moving towards the exit. Take my advice, Conan. For once in your life, do what makes you happy. Stop living for others and live for yourself. She opened the door of the room before pausing in the doorway, not bothering to turn around. You got a second chance at life, so you might as well just live it, it's the least you could do after taking all those lives away. And then she left without another word, leaving Conan in an uncomfortable silence with thoughts that circulated about a certain blonde man and her conflicted feelings about him. There was a tenseness that permeated the office of the Hokage that didn't exist before these four shinobi stepped through her door. What had happened? These four had been relatively fine when receiving their mission parameters a little over 2 weeks ago, and now the energy was anything but friendly. It was damn near hostile to some degree. Each one of their faces held some type of resentment or minor display of dislike. Well, all except for Sai, but you could never really tell with that man. Deciphering his emotions was even more difficult than figuring out what a woman was thinking. And that was a conundrum in itself. Sai seemed to give off more of a resigned acceptance than dislike and resentment. Naruto was downright apathetic, and the way his eyes darted towards the window of the office was a sign that he'd wished to get this over with as quickly as possible. Niji's expression bordered on disdain and annoyance, but he masked it rather well. And rounding off the group was Shikamaru, who didn't necessarily possess a negative expression upon his face, but the giant gap of distance he stood away from Naruto was very telling. What in the hell had happened? Are you one of you going to speak, or are we going to waste each other's time? It's clear that none of you want to be in this room right now. Tsunade's voice sliced through the tension, being as blunt as ever. I don't care who gives the after-mission report, but one of you better do so. Right. Now. There was a brief period of silence before Naruto pocketed one of his hands with a quiet sigh. Mission complete, Hokage-sama. He bit out quietly, other hand reaching into his flak jacket, pulling out a sealing scroll. Zetsu was captured and sealed away. He took a step forward, placing the scroll on Tsunade's desk before returning to his previous spot in the room. That was a surprise. Not even an annoying comment or drawn out "Iin." She needed a drink. Drinking at 12 p.m. wasn't necessarily on her to-do list for today, but she could definitely make an exception. Tsunade slowly nodded her head, taking the scroll and filing it away in her desk. She stared at her son for several moments, noticing that he refused to meet her eyes. "Is there anything else that you wish to speak about?" she questioned slowly. "No, Hokage-sama." The Jinchuriki replied shortly. It nearly made Tsunade frown. He was never this formal or respectful with her. And she definitely didn't like it. "If that is all, then you are all dismissed." The moment the words left her mouth, each man, barring Naruto, left in a burst of speed. They did not trade goodbyes or any sort of camaraderie that one would expect from a group who'd known each other for so long. Mother and son sat in silence for several minutes. It was not a comfortable one per se, but nor was it negative either. Tsunade drummed her fingers against her desk for a few moments before sighing quietly and speaking in a soft tone. "Hey, you okay?" Naruto's lips pursed for a moment as his gaze traveled towards the windows of the office. "No," he bit out quietly, tone laced with frustration. "Not at all. I'm so fucking tired of people judging me for doing the things I do. I don't fucking understand it. Why is it anyone's fucking business what I choose to do or not do?" Tsunade's mouth slowly dropped as she stared at her son. He never cursed at her or in front of her. Oh sure, he'd let his tongue slip on occasion, making a joke or something minor, but never in anger. This was something incredibly serious. "It's so damn annoying, Mom." Naruto lamented as he continued, his shoulders dropping as he walked towards the window. "It was bad enough when the people of this village were looking at me in fear, terrified that I'd let the Kyuubi out or something fucking ridiculous, but hell, I prefer the fear over the quiet distaste and judgment." And he tapered off quietly, his voice breaking as his emotions got the better of him. "And it hurts. I thought they were my friends, and they just judge me just like everyone else." His back met the glass pane of the window as he slowly slid down to his bottom, arms coming to pull at his knees. "What did I even do wrong?" Unshed tears swam in the man's eyes, but he refused to allow them to fall. He'd cried far too much in his life over pain. It solved nothing. But those tears fell anyway once Tsunade's arms wrapped around his head, pulling him into her bosom. His body betrayed him and he latched onto her like a child, squeezing her tightly as she ran her hands through his spiky hair. "Oh, honey," Tsunade cooed quietly, fingers threading through his tresses. "What happened?" she asked in a gentle voice, slowly settling to her knees whilst still holding her son. And so he told her everything. How a simple question had devolved into an argument before nearly coming to blows. All of it on the back of a difference of ideals and beliefs. Whereas Naruto chose to take the path of forgiveness, his peers decidedly did not, choosing to hate. The friendship that had been built upon by trust was destroyed and trampled, all because of a differing of ideals. Something not entirely surprising considering how the human heart and mind operated. Wars were caused for less and deaths even more so. It can seconds to form a bond of trust with someone, but it could take years to mend it once it was broken. Naruto had a rather skewed outlook on life despite the positive mindset he possessed. He'd been judged and ostracized his entire life. Friendship wasn't something that came easy or natural. The fact he had any friends due to his circumstances at Jinchuriki was a blessing. And he had just lost two incredibly close friends. Again, all because of differing viewpoints on life and its nuances. Tsunade could relate to Shikamaru and Niji's anger regarding Konan. However, Tsunade was far older and had experienced far worse during her tenure as a shinobi. She had let go of the hate in heart when Nawaki died. The human body could only take so much damage, and the mind was no different. Mental or physical didn't matter. To constantly live in a state of fear was a burden. To live with anger was a burden. Negativity would only breed stress, and with that stress comes fatigue. Tsunade didn't hate Konan. She tolerated her at best. She was only cordial with the woman because of Naruto. If it wasn't for her son, well, she'd be no better than those she condemned for acting out on their anger. Lashing out was childish. But again, humans are a fragile bunch. "Oh baby," Tsunade spoke gently, stroking her son's head. "That's just life, honey. You know that. People come and go all the time." Naruto allowed his eyes to close, leaning into the woman's gentle touch. "It isn't fair. I already know that life sucks. But for just one moment, just one, I'd like for things to go my way. Why am I the one always suffering? Why do I have to be strong?" Tsunade positioned herself beside the boy, sitting down and wrapping her arm around his shoulders, pulling his head onto her own. "No one can understand how the heart and mind works. Every person is different, and if I'm being honest, you're better off without people like that in your life. I may not like Konan, but I'd never let my personal feelings and beliefs affect the relationship I have with you. You're far too important to me for that." A stray tear threatened to fall from Naruto's eye, but he rubbed it away. I just can't understand why they'd resent me for it. I felt it in their hearts. This power I get from Kurama is a blessing and a curse." He paused for a moment before continuing, speaking in a quiet voice. "Am I really in the wrong about how I feel in regards to Konan? Now that was a question, wasn't it?" Tsunade did not possess the heart that Naruto carried, nor did she think like him. Her son was capable of carrying out deeds that would lick at her pride. Tsunade truly couldn't see herself ever forgiving Konan for what she had done. She had aided in killing the man she loved and had then proceeded to personally kill her apprentice. The anger and distaste that coursed through her veins was unfathomable. But was Naruto wrong for how he felt about the woman? No. She finally spoke, tone strong and firm. When the boy's head pulled away to stare into her eyes, she continued. "You are entitled to your own feelings and beliefs. It doesn't matter what I or anyone else thinks. The only person that can answer that question is you, Naruto." The man stared at his mother figure for several long seconds before averting his gaze and leaning his head atop her shoulder. "I don't think I'm wrong. I actually enjoy my time with Konan." He trailed off for a moment before eventually just going quiet. Tsunade allowed the boy to be silent for several minutes before eventually tackling the statement. What does she do, Naruto?" Her son made a sound of embarrassment, groaning as he replied. "Why did you have to ask?" He grumbled quietly, not noticing the dash of red that painted his cheeks. "She treats me like a normal person. She doesn't care that I'm a Jinchuriki or that I'm super strong or any of that. She isn't scared of the Kyuubi, and she doesn't care about any of that other prestigious crap that the elders like to throw around." Tsunade found it interesting that his tone had shifted to a more wistful one as he continued to speak about the woman. And boy, this was getting interesting. Amusing. Something along those lines. Her son was crushing on the woman and he didn't even seem to realize it. Should she help? That's what a good mother would do, right? Yes it is. But she was still going to tease him about it. After all, she was Tsunade and Naruto was her annoying ass son. Despite the bitter taste it'd leave in her mouth, she'd gladly pushed the boy into Konan's arms. The woman was in denial and she likely knew this. The papier-wielding woman had been in an awfully sour mood these past 2 weeks ever since their talk. The nurses and doctors that looked over her were beginning to complain. It didn't help that Konan had finally been cleared to use a wheelchair and yet, she all but refused to even use it. The stubborn woman had all but destroyed the damn thing and chose to sulk in her room. Throwing little tantrums every now and then. Though thankfully, she stopped destroying shit after the first week. It may or may not have taken a few callous threats on her part to stop Konan from causing further damage to the hospital. The bitch was already racking up unnecessary fees because of her little tantrums. If it continued, Tsunade would punt the cunt across the village. Well then. Tsunade abruptly spoke, interrupting Naruto's long-winded speech about the lavender-haired woman. "How about we go visit her? She's me, is at you." Let the teasing commence. And just as she expected, an embarrassed blush sprang to life upon his features. Stop it. "I sent a clone there when I stepped into the village, but I wouldn't mind seeing her." He ended his statement with a small smile. Young love. It made Tsunade sick to her stomach. But she'd shoulder it if it made her son happy. Because at the end of the day, if Naruto was happy then she was happy. Well, what are we waiting for then? Come on then. Let's go see your little girlfriend. She's not my girlfriend. Yet. Stop it. Konan stared up at the fluorescent lights with a blank gaze. Her thoughts had been jumbled these past 2 weeks and her emotions had been anything but stable. She'd go from frustrated to angry to wistful to sad and then back to anger. A tsunami of emotions gripped her being and she was loath to admit the truth that stared right at her face. The truth of having gained a twisted sort of attraction to the blonde man that Nagato had named as his successor. It was disgusting. Naruto wasn't the issue though. The issue was her and the fact that she was even feeling these torrent of emotions and feelings in the first place. Konan didn't deserve happiness. Not after everything she had done. To strangers, to the world and even Naruto himself. She had hurt him. And while he had stated multiple times that he had forgiven her, she hadn't forgiven herself. Naruto deserved someone who appreciated him and made him happy. The fact she had imagined herself in the very shoes of the woman who could offer those things to him was. Anger seeped into her veins and she was tempted to allow it free rein. However, that anger seemed to fizzle out as she thought on the suggestions from Tsunade. Destroy one more thing in this room and I'll destroy you. It was enough to stave off Konan's anger, if only slightly. It was still there and lurked deep beneath her skin. Who was she to have these feelings? She had killed the people that had shaped Naruto into the man he was today. What allowed her to be forgiven? Because he said so? Foolish. You need to atone for your sins. Why should you be allowed to feel love? All you've ever done was take. Konan agreed with the acidic voice in her head. Why should she be allowed to love? She had taken that very concept away from people. Her depressing thoughts were interrupted abruptly as the door to her room was practically ripped off its hinges. Konan's instincts took over as her head snapped towards the door. Several dozen paper shurikens manifested from her skin, hovering in front and around her as she stared at the door with dilated pupils. "An I. A loud and familiar voice boomed from the entrance. "Did you miss me?" Conan loathed how her body immediately relaxed. She despised how, despite the fact that his voice was loud and obnoxious, it brought comfort to her soul. She hated how shoulders uncoiled and how her jaw relaxed. All from his voice. It was just further fuel added to an already out of control inferno. Her body reacting subconsciously to Naruto was a telltale sign of her attraction to the man. And yet she still chose to ignore these feelings, thinking them nothing more than a bit of hero worship and admiration. Conan hated liars, and yet she couldn't even be truthful to herself. "Coward." Her mind whispered hatefully. "You'll forever be scared and terrified, always remain that little orphan who was abandoned, you deserve nothing." And while her mind whispered horrible and terrible things, Conan was numb to it. As her amber eyes settled on the man she had slowly grown attached to, she could no longer hear those venomous words from her mind. "Nah, Conan-chan." Naruto glided through the room, eyes creasing in concern. "Are you okay?" He sat down on her bed, torso facing towards her, and was definitely in her personal space. But she didn't mind. That fact alone was enough proof of her feelings, but again, Conan didn't wish to accept it. Naruto deserved better. She was not worthy of happiness. And who was to say that Naruto even saw her in that light? They were just friends, as he so eloquently put it. The one-sided friendship, she thought quietly. He did most of the talking and didn't mind her silence. The little time she would engage with him, his eyes never left hers and he focused on every little word. Though she did find it strange how, when he thought she wasn't looking, he'd just stare. It had been uncomfortable at first because she couldn't ascertain the reasoning as to why he'd be staring at. An epiphany struck Conan and her thoughts ground to a halt. It did Naruto. No. She was imagining things. That couldn't, it just didn't. "Boy." Naruto yelled, reaching for Conan's hand and gently holding it. "You haven't answered me. I'm getting worried." Amber orbs fluttered multiple times, confusion and shock showcased. It took Conan several seconds to come down from her absurd realization, but when she did, I'm fine, Naruto." Her eyes gazed at Naruto's hands, gently caressing hers. His thumbs glided down the back of her hand, moving in circular motions. Conan's eyes slowly raked along the man's arm, briefly staring at his chest before slowly and hesitantly meeting Naruto's single cerulean orb. "I promise." That eye of his displayed so many emotions that Conan was unable to process them all. From concern and worry, to conflicted, to bashfulness, and then joy. It was amazing how expressive Naruto could be. Conan envied him for it. She'd always hid behind her apathy after Yahiko's death. And when Nagato passed, she had thought she abandoned them entirely. But here she was, feeling warm for the first time in years. And she didn't want it to go away. "I'm glad. That makes me happy." He replied with a tiny smile that didn't quite reach his eye. It made Conan frown. Something wasn't right. She didn't even realize that she was returning Naruto's gentle ministrations with small grazes of her own. "Something on your mind, Naruto?" She proposed quietly, gaze locked onto his face. When his eyes averted hers, she knew something major must have happened. Considering she knew that he and his squad went hunting for Zetsu, she had a tinge of worry that something awful must have happened. "What happened, Naruto?" There must have been an urgency to her voice because Naruto's eyes immediately snapped to hers. His face showed confusion for all of a second before he opened his mouth, making an ah sound. "The mission was a success. We captured Zetsu. He can't actually be killed and we learned that pretty early on. I sealed him away and he won't cause any problems again." He explained with a smile, though it slowly fell as he continued to speak. Something happened between me and my FR teammates. He paused for a moment as one of his hands vacated their position and found purchase on his headband, fiddling with it nervously. "We got into an argument and it caused a rift between us. I'm no longer friends with them." His eyes fell to their conjoined hands, fingers gliding over hers. A sad smile framed his face as he spoke. "It's probably for the best, yeah. Sometimes you're unable to see eye to eye with others and there isn't you because of it." A small frown framed Conan's face as she continued to stroke the man's larger hand. She was hesitant to ask what they had spoken about, but she had a few guesses as to what it was. "What caused it?" she asked softly. And when his eye met hers, she instantly knew. He didn't even need to explain. She could see it. Naruto had lost friends he had fought and bled for all because of her. Lost relationships with people he'd have happily laid his life down for because of her. A wave of nausea swam through her stomach, threatening to upend her half-eaten dinner from yesterday. She was already having a negative impact on his life. "Don't do that." Conan flinched at the rather harsh tone. Her eyes flicked to his, noticing that his features were tightened. He didn't necessarily look angry at her, but rather with her. "But why? Stop beating yourself up. It isn't your fault." I lost friends because they couldn't accept my choices, they judged me and resented me for them. Regardless of how hard they tried to hide them, his face tightened and his head tilted, struggling to remain composed as his eyes began to glisten with tears. I could sense their anger, could sense their resentment. These powers are a blessing and a curse. There was silence in the room for a few moments before Conan slowly shook her head, fingers closing around the man's hand. Because of me, she stated resolutely. Naruto shook his head though, not even remotely agreeing. No. Because they couldn't accept my actions. I chose to forgive you. I chose to save you. I choose to protect you. And I don't regret it, he finished in a quiet tone, as if embarrassed to speak those words. Despite herself, Conan blushed at his words. Never in her life had she heard someone say something like that in regards to her. Yahiko and Nagato were like brothers to her, and while she and Yahiko had never pursued their relationship further, it had been genuine from both sides. He died before they could truly come to terms with one another, and regret had plagued her life. It was this regret that prevented her from seeking her own happiness. It prevented her from convincing Nagato to abandon Madara's plan. She had vehemently protested following the man's identity as Madara, but she had never truly put her foot down. Had she done so, maybe things would have been different. Regret, regret, regret. Her eyes zeroed in on Naruto's, losing herself in the ocean of blue. Maybe for one time, for once in your life, do what makes you happy. Tsunade's words resurfaced in her mind, replaying and practically hammering into her skull. Maybe she could be happy. Conan swallowed her trepidation, anxiety coursing through her veins. Her fingers tightened around Naruto's hand, briefly drawing his gaze before they flicked back up to her eyes, a slightly confused expression on his face. Naruto H, how do you feel about me? She mentally cursed herself for the stutter, cheeks staining red as she averted her gaze. Naruto's eyebrows furrowed at the question, easily sensing Conan's anxiety through his negative emotion sensing. How did he feel about her? Well, I enjoy being around you. I feel like I could be myself around you and not really have to worry about being judged. Conan's amber orb snapped back to the blondes, gazing at him intently, holding on to each and every word. I enjoy our conversations even if you don't really talk. He laughed softly at his light-hearted joke, noticing that Conan's lips had a slight upturn to them, displaying how she felt about his teasing. And I feel like we get along rather well. For the past month that I've been watching over you, I've felt a lot of the regret and sadness you have regarding what you've done. It's a lucky guess if anything, but I know how it feels to think like that. I blamed myself when Kakashi-sensei died. Conan flinched at the words, but Naruto only stroked her hand, continuing in a softer tone. I thought to myself, if I had only been stronger. Or if I had just given Nagato the Kyuubi, then everyone who died would still be alive. But I learned that blaming myself for things out of my control would never heal my wounds. Well, Bachan said that, but she's not here, so I'm gonna act like I said them. He expressed with a cheeky smile, one that Conan nearly imitated. Despite our past and history with one another, I truly have forgiven you, Conan. Sakura's death was something that I struggled to grapple with considering the events that had led up to it. Sasuke had become a problem, and him joining the Akatsuki had only worsened the toxic dynamic that Team 7 had. She became obsessive. I tried to talk her out of it, tried to explain to her that Sasuke chose to abandon us in the village. But she wouldn't listen. And in the end, she died for it. Naruto's eye fell to their conjoined hands. I don't hate you for what you did. I was angry about what happened. Who wouldn't be? But hate you? No. There's already enough of that in this world. But if I still hate anyone in this world, it'd be Nagato. He squeezed Conan's hand, receiving a squeeze in return. All those lives gone. I just can't let go of what happened. I've tried to get over it. But I can't, and I know what he meant to you. But I hope that doesn't change things between us. Of course it doesn't. Naruto, I didn't even expect you to forgive me. It's completely rational for you to hate Nagato because of what happened. Hell, I can't even forgive myself for even allowing it to happen, and for that, I'll live with guilt and regret for the rest of my life. You shouldn't have to though. Naruto replied strongly, stroking her dainty fingers. You weren't the one to do it. It changes nothing, Naruto. Conan stated just as strongly. I chose to sit by and watch. I will pay my dues when the time comes. There is no changing my mind. The Jinchuriki grunted quietly, obviously discontented about Conan's words. Can we just agree to disagree then? He spoke childishly, with a pout. Conan briefly entertained the thought, making a show of even tapping her chin with her index. No. The man's annoyed expression was like a taste of heaven. She could get used to this. Teasing the boy, that is. The comfortable silence settled in the room as Naruto and Conan continued to idly play with each other's hands. For the first time in a long while, Conan was finally at ease. For her entire life, she had been looking over her shoulder, worried that she'd not live to see another day. But right now, everything was perfect. Okay, and I brought your little boyfriend. He's missed you so much. Scratch that. Everything was awful. Terrible. Horrible. Absolutely dreadful. The Naruto beside her offered little more than an embarrassed smile before disappearing in a poof of smoke. Traitor. Her mind shouted furiously. How dare he leave her? He needed to suffer just like she was. Muam. Naruto's embarrassed shout followed the Hokage's shout. Stop it. We're just close friends. He insisted with a dash of pink painting his cheeks. Oh no, what have you done? Konan nearly palmed her face with both hands. Tsunade questioned with a sly smile, pivoting on her heel to face her son. Close friends now? Earlier you told me you were just friends. But now you're close friends. A delicate eyebrow raised as she continued. Have any names in mind? While Naruto expressed a bit of confusion at Tsunade's words, Konan immediately understood the underlying statement in the woman's words. The paper wielder wanted nothing more than to cocoon herself in a shell of paper, hiding her embarrassment. This was too damn much. And for the remainder of the day, Naruto and Konan were relentlessly teased by Tsunade. Though the both of them couldn't deny how good it sounded. The sun felt nice. Konan allowed the beams of light to shine on her porcelain skin. Her eyes slowly closed as she leaned against the back of her wheelchair. A semi-strong breeze of air swept through the area, jostling her medium-length hair. Feels good, doesn't it? A small smile found its way to Konan's face as Naruto's voice resounded out from behind her. It does. The blonde man smiled as he wheeled Konan through the more remote parts of the village, well aware of the multiple eyes on his and her position. He had pushed her through the more populated areas and had received less than stellar reactions from the villagers. They hadn't done much more than throw the occasional insult, but a few brave individuals tried to bar their trek. Those individuals were asleep. Whether that be from his fist origin jutsu was truly up in the air. Another light breeze swept through the air, causing Konan's hair to fall in front of her face. Her face scrunched up in slight annoyance as she swung her head, moving her lavender tresses out of her face. I think your hair looks nice like that. Naruto offhandedly remarked, eyes flicking to the trees beside them, spotting several blurs of movement. Konan blinked at his words before subtly leaning her head forward, causing her hair to fall in front of her face. Her eyes narrowed briefly before she adjusted the tresses to cover only one side of her face. The kunai was placed in front of her face, courtesy of Naruto. See? You look beautiful. Amber orb stared into the reflective surface of the weapon. An embarrassed blush spread across her features as she peeked at Naruto's reflection in the metal. She was far too old to have butterflies in her stomach, but Kami damn it, Naruto was just exceeding every single one of her perceived beliefs and smashing through them as if they never existed. Konan had yet to truly come to terms with her feelings about the man, but she was far more open to the idea, at least. While she struggled with her conflicted feelings about the man and her actions to said man, she also wasn't entirely opposed to being in an intimate setting with him. Whatcha thinking bout, Konan-chan? Said man asked curiously, veins now protruding around his left eye. Nothing important. She replied quietly, fiddling with her nails. She really needed to get them done. Her ruby paint had chipped off and her fingernails were a little too long. You sure? He asked while nonchalantly sticking one of his hands into his pockets. He fingered a couple of kunai as he glanced down towards Konan, noticing how relaxed her shoulders were. Good. She hadn't noticed yet. Well, she began softly, still staring at her hands, inspecting her nails. I need to get my fingernails done, it's been so long. They look hideous. Naruto peeked over her shoulder, Byakugan still active to survey their pursuers. Oh, what am I supposed to be looking at? He asked in slight confusion, staring at her fingernails. The woman sighed heavily, speaking in a tone that an adult would use when explaining things to a child. Look closer. My nail polish is fading and cracked on multiple fingers. My fingernails are also a tad too long. It's unhygienic. Naruto raised an eyebrow as he stared at the woman's nails, not really noticing what she was talking about. But he eventually just shrugged, agreeing with her. Do you want me to take you to a salon? They were getting closer now and Konan was still oblivious. That was good. He could work with that. Well, he certainly could have dealt with them earlier, he wanted to know exactly who was following them. It never ceased to amaze him how brazen and foolish his fellow shinobi could be. Konan stopped inspecting her nails as she turned to gaze at her blonde companion. She stared into his orb, noticing that the veins around his left eye were protruding. Why was he using the Byakugan? Is everything okay? She asked in concern, slowly expanding her senses outward. Naruto immediately stopped her with a smile, leaning over the chair to continue pushing her with his lower body. His unoccupied hand came up to her face and he boldly swept her hair out her face. Of course. He reassured easily, winking as he did, relishing in her rather shocked expression. Now, do you or do you not want to go to a salon? I'll pay. Konan tried everything in her power to prevent the blush that crept onto her face, but in the end, she lost. Her head swiveled back around as she ducked her head in embarrassment. Why yes, I'd like that very much. Thank you. Curse her damn stutters. Naruto sighed quietly to himself, relieved to have diverted her attention. 6 of them in total were now within a dozen meters of their position. He returned to his full height before slowly pulling 2 kunai out of his pocket. He reached into his flak jacket, pulling out some ninja wire and threading it through the kunai's finger holes. While he threaded the wires, a small application of chakra caused several sealing matrices to conjure on the razor-sharp fiber. Tying the ends to the kunais, he continued to speak with Conan. "Ever been to a salon before, Conan-chan?" Finally managing to get her blush under control, Conan nodded her head. "I've only been a handful of times. I usually do them myself." Naruto nodded his head, threading the ninja wire around his fingers. He zigzagged the wires multiple times before using his sharpened canines to cut through the metallic fibers. Once satisfied with his creation, he took aim before throwing the kunais at one of the various trees around them. A near-invisible wall of ninja wire was left behind, spanning out several meters in width and height. "Do you do your toes as well?" Naruto asked curiously. The paper wielder idly shook her head, curious on why she felt Naruto's chakra spike for a brief moment. "Not all of the time, but I have been doing them more frequently. It depends on how I'm feeling." Naruto nodded his head, continuing to slowly push Conan. "Have you ever done your hair differently? 30 meters now." Conan immediately shook her head. "I've always cut it before it gets too long. A megakure only ever rains and having long hair was annoying to deal with when constantly wet. So I've always cut it. Why do you ask?" The Jinchuriki smiled, shrugging his shoulders as he responded. "Want to get it done at the salon." Conan's eyebrows furrowed as one of her hands came up to her rather long tresses, running her fingers through it. I don't know what I want to do. It's getting very long and I haven't had the time to really cut it. I don't know if I want to." Naruto raised a curious eyebrow. "Oh? And why's that? Thought you preferred it short." Conan was silent for a moment before replying slowly. "I want to try new things. To step out of my comfort zone." "Well, whatever you do, I'll support you," he exclaimed boisterously. 10 meters now. Any second now and they'd trigger the. A huge explosion rang out from behind the couple, stopping them in their tracks. Conan's entire body tensed as her head snapped towards the ginormous explosion, watching as cinder and ash rained from the sky. A small mushroom cloud had sprang from the explosion, the smoldering fire spreading throughout the forest. Her eyes snapped onto Naruto's, noticing how nonchalant he was being, not at all surprised about the gigantic explosion behind him. "What's happening?" she asked frantically, staring behind her at the inferno. Naruto slowly turned her wheelchair towards the flames, leaning over the chair while speaking. "That would be my response to you being targeted." Conan's eyebrows furrowed as her companion navigated her wheelchair towards the explosion. Her mind raced furiously, quickly putting 2 and 2 together. She'd been targeted. But why now? Why not during the time she had been alone when Naruto was out on his mission? Why did they pick now of all time? It didn't make sense. "I created a barrier in your hospital room that only allowed Bachan and any medic that I trusted to enter," he explained coldly, as if reading her mind. "It'd lethally shock anyone else who tried to enter it, frying them from the inside out. You're under my protection. If anyone has a problem with it then they answer to me." Conan's lips parted at the rather possessive tone. Her cheeks began to redden and this time, she welcomed it. This side of Naruto was something else. Conan found herself wanting to see more of it. Was that wrong? Probably. But she truly did not care. As they neared the inferno, Conan couldn't help the conflicted feelings circulating in her body. Whoever had targeted her was likely dead, having been caught in this enormous trap set by Naruto. While a part of her worried about what would happen to Naruto, considering the political ramifications of having killed fellow shinobi, she was also happy in a twisted sort of way. He had protected her instantly. Not even hesitating to put individuals down who'd target her. It was sweet. Again, in a twisted sort of way. An agonizing groan emanated from near the fire, and Conan was actually shocked that someone had survived the explosion. The Hokage herself had probably felt the explosion despite how far off they were from the center point of the village. "Ah, good. You're still alive. I'd hope at least one of you survived. After all, you are targeting a woman known to be an S-rank shinobi. It'd be downright fucking stupid for you to be anything less than an A rank," Naruto casually remarked, creating a clone and having it take up his previous position. "And that's not even counting me in the equation. It still surprises me how stupid you people can truly be when blinded by anger." The blonde man swept his hand through the area, creating a vortex of wind that began to suck the oxygen out of the fire. In less than 30 seconds, the raging inferno disappeared entirely, revealing a set of bodies that were charred and smoldering. One of the bodies was a little ways away, the man most likely having seen the wire before trying to warn his group. Naruto continued to walk towards the dying man, hands in his pockets and headband raised, revealing his taijutsu. An ear-piercing scream tore through the heavens as Naruto casually kicked the man over, watching as burnt skin was ripped from the man's body. "Stop screaming," he muttered in annoyance. "You're being loud and annoying." Shaking his head, he dropped to his haunches, making eye contact with the man. What's your name? The man's face was heavily burned, his jawline and the bones beneath it being exposed for the world. Half of his face was practically non-existent and most of his hair had been singed off. And despite all this, the man was defiant. Fuck you. The unnamed Jonin spit out hatefully. I won't talk. Naruto tilted his head with confusion evident on his face. Who said I needed you to talk? I only asked for your name. Shaking his head in faux disappointment, he slowly stood back to his full height while raising his right foot. I'll see you in hell. The man's abrupt scream was silenced as Naruto's foot descended upon his skull, smashing it with ease and spraying the man's brain matter along the ground. Conan's eyes widened at the rather brutal display and she was slightly ashamed to admit it, but a shiver of pleasure ran down her spine, watching him stomp on that man's skull. Kami, she was twisted. And no amount of therapy or rehabilitation would ever fix that. Meanwhile, Naruto had begun to clean up the mess he caused, dosing the raging infernos and rearranging the landscape to mask the charred damage to the earth. After a minute or so, the entire landscape showed zero signs of having been caught in a massive explosion, save for the burned trees around them. The bodies had already been handled, being buried by a Doton Jutsu. Well, that solves that. Naruto stated, dusting his hands off casually as he made his way back to Conan. You okay, Conan-chan? Was she okay? Okay. She was. Well, some things were just better off not being said. So she'd keep it to herself for the time being. Conan heard the telltale sign of a shadow clone being popped. She didn't bother turning around to see what had happened and instead tried to gain control of her raging blush. Coughing lightly, Conan nodded her head, averting his gaze. Why yes. I'm fine, are you? Personal feelings and wetness clouding her mind, Conan was still mindful of Naruto and his feelings. The blonde turned his head towards random direction, sensing several dozen shinobi heading towards his location. He pursed his lips for a moment before shrugging his shoulders and positioning himself behind Conan. I'll be fine. He placed one of his hands on Conan's shoulders, ignoring how she shivered at his touch. People are coming, I wanna avoid useless questions. What happened here today stays between us. And then they proceeded to vanish in a golden flash. Conan shook off the brief wave of nausea from Naruto's movement, eyes gazing at her surroundings. She was slightly surprised to see them in the more populated areas of Konoha, despite what just happened. It's not every day you see a man casually kill his fellow shinobi turned traitors and then act casually as if nothing had happened. She turned her head towards her companion, noticing his eyes staring down at her. One blue and one white. Such an odd combination and yet, it seemed to complement him rather well. Why do you cover the eye? From what I can see, you're able to activate it and deactivate not with little issue. She questioned curiously, ignoring her surroundings and keeping her amber eyes on his dual gaze. Naruto made to cover his Byakugan before hesitating, halting himself from doing so. He was quiet for a few moments, occasionally glancing around at all the people staring at them. It's my own way of honoring my sensei. He kept his Sharingan covered because he was incapable of deactivating it. I never had that issue because Kurama integrated it with my own chakra system, but yeah. That's why I keep it covered. Should I not cover it? He asked while scratching his whiskered cheeks. Conan wondered if he liked them being stroked and if he'd lean into her hand like a puppy, and she needed to stop thinking like that. Pushing those thoughts aside, Conan dipped her head once. Yes. I think you look handsome. She bit out in a slightly embarrassed tone, cheeks dashing pink. Naruto, instead of being embarrassed and surprised, seemed to capitalize on her moment of weakness. A sly smile formed on his face as he leaned closer to hers, nose nearly touching her own. Oh? He breathed out in a low tone, drinking in Conan's wide eyes. I'm handsome now. Oh, stop, Conan-chan. You're gonna make me blush. The woman's face only got redder at his words and she couldn't hope to tame her raging emotions. His breath was on her own lips and he was so close to her. His eyes were as expressive as ever and she had difficulty trying to focus on his eyes. She couldn't stop the brief dip her eyes made, gazing at his lips for a moment before returning to his dual-colored gaze. See close. Too close. Way too close. Thankfully Naruto pulled away with a hearty laugh, repositioning himself behind her chair and pushing her forward. I'm just teasing you, Conan-chan. He laughed once more, not noticing her relieved sigh. Want to go to the salon now? Conan couldn't trust herself to speak and so she offered a small nod, face still enflamed by the man's teasing. Kami, she couldn't even control her emotions around him now. It's like she was a completely different person now. It was such an abrupt change from the woman she used to be. Conan couldn't even recognize herself anymore. And if she was being honest, she didn't mind all that much. Then onward. To the salon. He cheered childishly, pointing in a random direction and completely ignoring the annoyed stares from the populace. And despite herself, a small smile blossomed on Conan's face. It was a tentative one. A smile tempered by pain, hurt and regret. But it was a genuine smile. A smile that hadn't seen the light of day for nearly 2 decades. Thank you, Naruto. There was a time in Conan's life where she had been innocent. A simpler time, one filled with the blissful ignorance that came with being a child. It was a fleeting thing, a brief memory if anything. But Conan believed that negative experiences produced growth. She wouldn't be the woman she was today if it weren't for the negative experiences. That statement went both ways in terms of how she personally viewed herself. Conan believed she was strong. And she was. One didn't rise to the rank of S rank on a whim. She had proven herself to be a worthy adversary in combat. But did that strength outweigh all the bad she'd done? At the end of the day, every person in this world is capable of doing bad and doing good. Some choose to use their gifts for selfish desires, and others do so because it's the only option they believe they have. Conan fell in the former rather than the latter. She had done evil deeds for others based solely on unnecessary self-fulfillment. She grew up having nothing and no one. Was she to abandon her foster family, who had done nothing but nurture and care for her, when things got progressively darker? Conan had broke bread with Nagato and Yahiko, and they made sure she was protected and vice versa. They were her family. And she'd have sooner slit her throat than abandon them. Yahiko's death was the catalyst for destruction. Looking back on that moment and the negative events that transpired because of it, Conan didn't truly know what she'd do with the knowledge she possessed now. Would she have continued down that path of destruction? Would she have tried to sway Nagato away from that ridiculous plan of Tobi's? Would she have instead slit her throat to atone for the sin she committed? Thinking about the past did nothing and changed nothing. Well, not entirely. Conan could safely say that she'd never do something so ludicrous again. But that's really a moot point, isn't it? Learning from your mistakes only prevented similar ones from happening. It didn't necessarily change you and how you think. The kunai was sharp. The first time you cut yourself with a weapon is usually never the last time you do so. You're just more cautious handling it. Even with years of experience and every precaution taken, you could still end up nicking yourself. What did any of this mean at the end of the day? Nothing. Because at the end of the day she wasn't even supposed to be alive. She had escaped death's cold embrace by sheer luck, and while Conan knew she should cherish these moments, she just couldn't. Stop it. Conan flinched as someone's, Naruto's, hand lightly chopped her head. She ducked her head briefly as she massaged the spot he had struck. That ability of yours is becoming increasingly annoying. She rubbed the spot once more, turning to face the man as she continued. Cease this at once. Nope. Naruto responded, irritability, even going so far as to make a popping noise with the P. I already told you to stop thinking so negatively about yourself. It doesn't help. Her bottom lip threatened to stick out, but through sheer willpower Conan prevented it. But they're my emotions. You would deny me the right. Yep. That was far too fast of a reply. He hadn't even thought about it. This was completely unfair. Sucks to suck, Conan-chan. He chortled in an annoying manner, steering her through the troves of people in the village. Thinking all negative isn't gonna magically make you feel better. It's just a loop cycle. Why think about it when you can move on? He made it sound so easy to do so. That's because it is. He affirmed with a nod. She had said that out loud, hadn't she? Annoying. Conan was going through drastic changes. The odd little tics that she had possessed when she was a child were resurfacing with a vengeance. And she didn't know if that was truly a bad thing or not. On one hand, it showed her how much Naruto's presence affected her. Only positively, of course. Her mind was at ease with the boy around. And while she still allowed her thoughts to occasionally drift off into the abyss that she'd known all her life, it wasn't as prevalent with him by her side. Naruto was capable of bringing out the things she kept behind closed doors, locked away in a nearly inescapable chest covered with locks and chains, that was then buried in the cement of the room. Translation: yes. There was this ramen shop I used to go to all the time when I was younger. Naruto spoke out the blue, per his usual self, oblivious to the odd thought circulating in Conan's head. Back before the whole thing with Pain and Whatnot, it was family-owned Ichiraku Ramen. A widowed father and his young daughter ran the shop. Day in and day out they worked, making the most delicious ramen I've ever had in my life. His tone was wistful, and it didn't take an analytical genius to know that they hadn't survived Konoha's destruction. I sometimes get these vicious cravings to have a big bowl of miso ramen every now and again. His signed eye drifted towards the clouds in the sky as he continued speaking. A lot of my peers said that was and I quote, ramen fiend, but it wasn't because it was my favorite, it was just cheap and highly affordable. I mean, don't get me wrong, ramen is pretty good and everything, but it isn't tonkatsu or yakiniku. And that stuff can get expensive depending on teriyaki type of meats you're grilling. Without truly thinking, Conan offhandedly spoke, trying to speak more instead of allowing Naruto to freely run their conversations. I've never had yakiniku. Wah, the blonde questioned, baffled. You haven't? Ever? Conan's tresses bounced as she shook her head, amber eyes trailing along the marketplace that Naruto pushed her through. She blinked in confusion as her wheelchair was suddenly jostled, pivoting nearly 90 degrees into a whole new direction. Well, that's gonna change today. Naruto boomed out loud with a chuckle. We'll get some yakiniku and then head straight to a salon. How's that sound, Konan-chan? It sounded adequate. She responded quietly. And though her barren answer left little to be desired, a warmth emanated deep from within her bosom. You're no fun, Konan-chan. Live a little. The hell does adequate mean? She very much doubted that he didn't know what that word meant. He was clearly trying to bait her into a response. And she'd have none of it. Nope. Not even a little. Seconds continued to pass on in silence as Konan continued to keep silent, resisting the urge to give Naruto the definition of the word. She was strong. She was scary. She would not break. Konan had killed troves of men and women in her lifetime. Faced down threats that could potentially annihilate armies and even stared a Biju down, face to face. This would not register on an emotional level. Satisfactory or acceptable in quality or quantity. Kami damn it. An annoying guffaw of laughter was Naruto's response. The clone appeared in a minor poof of smoke, opening the door to a rather upscale yakiniku restaurant that rested in the middle of the more wealthier side of Konoha. It was a blessing that Konan was able to fit through the door, considering her wheelchair wasn't exactly small. The interior was what you'd expect from a place that was pricey. Gold ornaments strung about in various places, velvety accessories draped along the linings and cloth that covered the windows and tables, and of course, several chandeliers. You couldn't be fancy without a chandelier. It was a written rule in high-class society. Seems Konan struggled to convey an appropriate description of the establishment. Unnecessary. Naruto helpfully supplied, not caring if his voice was heard or not. Konan blanched lightly, not wishing to really attract more attention than she was already going to get. She was in a wheelchair on top of being one of the most wanted women in the world, yeah, not good for wanting to be incognito. Fancy. She corrected in a soft tone, swiveling her head to gaze at her companion. Why here of all places? Would it not have been better to go elsewhere? She didn't wish to sound ungrateful or anything of the sort, but this was a bit much. Naruto didn't strike her as the type that'd enjoy this kind of dining. Upscale restaurants like this were more for the experience and less so for the food. Naruto idly wheeled her towards the hostess, ignoring the stares he was receiving from a majority of the room. I have a coupon. He answered simply. Konan just stared, not even for a second believing his words. There wasn't a single scenario, way or explanation that Naruto could provide that would make her believe otherwise. Uzumaki Naruto. The hostess exclaimed in shock, surprise evident on her features. Finally decided to use that coupon, have you? No. Absolutely not. This was utter horse sh. Hey Minami. How are ya? The Jinchuriki greeted with a smile and a wave, still pushing his companion. Yep. I was planning on using it a while back, but just never got around to it really. The hostess, or rather Minami, just smiled, grabbed 2 menus as she spoke. For 2. She made a gesture towards Konan, expression solely curious. It seems the woman didn't recognize her. That was positive at least. It wouldn't be good if anyone in the staff knew who she was. They'd likely spit in her food and drinks. And that'd be unpleasant but not completely undeserved. Beep. Naruto nodded with an accentuated pop. Good to hear. The hostess responded with a smile. I recommend a private room. Her eyes, not so discreetly, landed upon Konan. Well, there went that knowledge. Unfortunate. At least her stomach was pure iron from the rather disgusting things she'd been forced to eat as a child. A bit of spit wouldn't truly hurt her anyway. The couple didn't respond to the hostess and only followed after her, allowing the pair to see the entirety of the restaurant. And it was just as over the top as Konan imagined it to be. She'd never understand how the minds of the wealthy operated. Such gross usage of gold and purple with royal red was well, there wasn't really an answer for it now was there. And here we are, table for 2. Minami presented with a flourish of her hands. In our famous private booth. Well, that was a suggestive tone wasn't it? And Konan despised the heat it brought forth in her. How dare her body betray her? The woman dropped the menus off on the table before offering a short bow to both shinobi. I will leave you two to it. When you are ready to order, there's a button near the end of the table that'll call for me. Bye bai, and she proceeded to skip out the room without another word. Odd woman. Konan's head swiveled towards the table booth grill hybrid contraption with slight confusion. How in the world did any of this work? Unlike a normal table booth where you could move chairs to make space or in her circumstance, allow a wheelchair to be sat at the table, there was none. Well, this was a predicament. You already know I need to move you so don't act confused. Naruto stated with a smirk, swiveling Konan's chair towards the booth. I was not confused. She denied with a minor glower. There is just little space. She sniffed quietly, eyes glancing back towards the table. Stop pouting. She wasn't pouting. Naruto glided from behind her chair, taking point directly in front of her. A small smile framed his face as he bent his knees slightly. Let me know if you start to hurt, yeah. Konan met his gaze and offered little more than a nod. The way his right hand glided along her back nearly caused her to shiver. It was tender and caring. Soft and harmless. Though she nearly grunted when that very same hand gripped her waist, near the wound she had suffered from Obito. "Sorry." He muttered quietly, hand moving lower to grip her thighs instead. "Just don't think about it. Just don't think about it. Just don't think about it." Despite the mantra reciting itself within her mind, she was physically incapable of doing so. She was thinking about it. A lot. She totally wasn't thinking of how his calloused fingers dug into the meat of her thighs, hefting her body towards his chest. Or how his left arm glided along her back before gently gripping her shoulder, causing her head to rest underneath his chin. And she definitely wasn't thinking of how toned and muscular said chest was. Nope. Not at all. Not even a little. "Any pain?" Naruto questioned, single eye glancing down at her lavender tresses. "Only in my loins." She mentally uttered and was nearly taken aback by her thoughts. How unlike her they were. Her attraction to the man was proving to be incredibly potent. Regardless of how much her thoughts tried to prevent it from doing so, her body was just incapable of doing so. Naruto was making her she felt filthy just thinking about the word. Best to keep that under lock and key. And no. She bit out quietly, eyes squinting close as she tried to compose herself. "I'm fine, yes, perfectly fine." She was grateful that Naruto didn't question her stutter and definitely unbelievable affirmation. It was the little victories that mattered. Naruto gently lowered the woman into the booth, making sure to be mindful of the grill and the various ingredients that were already set out near the booth. He released a sigh, hoping to have covered the relief in it before pulling away from the woman. "Need anything else?" He questioned with a smile that he hoped passed for normal. It did not. It was very much crooked. Though Conan didn't seem to notice in her mind, so wrapped up in her own thoughts about the man in front of her. Did she need anything? Well, she needed those rough hands of his to be wrapped around her throat and she lost. And no. She answered a little too quickly. A quick cough to mask the embarrassment that she was feeling. "Thank you, Naruto." The Jinchuriki waved off the gratitude in his usual manner. "If you need anything, just let me know, yeah." He took his seat on the opposite side of the grill and Conan released a sigh of relief. The couple then sat in silence, eyes trailing over the menu but not actually reading it. So absorbed in their own thoughts about the other that they were pulled from their thoughts due to the hostess returning, fidgeting in surprise when the double doors practically bust open. "Well, it's been." Minami checks her watch. 10 minutes. She exclaimed with a mischievous smile, though she seemed to be mildly disappointed when gazing at the couple. "Well, I'd have figured that 10 minutes of privacy would have had you two unable to keep your hands off one another." Naruto's expression blanched at the thought of doing something like that in public and with his single eye snapped towards the lavender-haired woman and noticed that her expression bordered more on embarrassed. The light dash of pink on her cheeks was telling and yet Naruto didn't know what to. No matter. "I'm sure by the end of this meal you'll be unable to keep each other's lips off the other." Minami piped up with a giggle. "So, what are we having tonight?" How could this woman go from suggesting such scandalous things to casually asking what their meal would be? Conan didn't or rather couldn't understand how people could be so open with their affections and actions. She'd always been a private woman. Any thoughts of doing such affectionate things with a partner were saved for the privacy of her sanctum. The couple, avoiding eye contact with one another, ordered haphazardly from the menu, not even bothering to really put any thought into it. Minami left shortly after, teasing the couple as she did. Conan's amber orbs glided towards Naruto, noticing the heavy shade of red that painted his own cheeks. There was a mutual attraction that they shared, that much she truly knew. Whether that attraction was physical and intimate or purely emotional was something she. Nope. Full stop. That line of thinking was nearing toward negative and she didn't need her brain trying to dismantle the idea of being with someone who made her feel warm. Naruto was handsome, in a boyish kind of way that Conan would have previously ignored altogether. His personality was nearly the direct opposite of hers. Where he was loud and boisterous, she was quiet and stoic. The teen was an extrovert while she, an introvert. His physical looks aside, he seemed to just have a way with his words. She lost count of the amount of times that he nearly caused her to smile. A real, genuine smile. She hadn't done so since Yahiko's death and yet here she was, tittering about like a child with her first crush. Had this been years ago during the Akatsuki, she'd have slit her wrists and lay in scalding water. Such actions and thoughts were saved for children and those with, at least back in those days, foolish beliefs. Life had a funny way of sucker punching you in the face while simultaneously providing you the ice pack to nurture the wound. But that was the beauty of life, no. She had been so jaded for so long that anything remotely bordering on positive was met with the steel walls of cynicism and bitter beliefs. And now she found herself. Dare she finally admit it? Dare she finally accept the thing she was trying to avoid for the past 2 weeks? Did she truly, honest to Kami herself, accept that she loved Naruto? Just the thought was enough to drown her mental with a sea of anxiety, anger, bitterness and denial. Screams of denial rang deep within her mind while anxiety stained her being. How could she love someone who she hurt so badly? No amount of time would mend the wounds she inflicted on Naruto. Wounds that didn't cause physical pain but emotional pain. A pain that scarred the heart and hurt more than anything a physical wound could inflict. And though her mind warded herself, demeaning any thoughts of ever being with Naruto, her heart was the one thing she could actually focus on. Feelings that she thought she had abandoned due to Yahiko resurfaced. And they didn't just float atop the surface either. They practically rocketed out. Almost like an explosion set off in her body did it spread through her, overtaking her and silencing all the negative thoughts in her mind. She loved Naruto. Honest to Kami, she truly did. She loved his smile, she loved his obnoxious laughs. She loved his jokes. Loved his gentleness. Loved. Oh, she was positive that this emotional epiphany was clouding her rational and cold-hearted logical side, but she could care fucking less. Right here and now, tiptoeing and all but avoiding the problem that stared into her face for the past 2 weeks, Konan was well and truly happy. But how could she prove this to Naruto himself? How could she show him? Naruto was far from dense and despite the teasing from his mother, was well aware of the attraction he had for her. The real question was if he was aware of her attraction to him. Konan was not a normal woman by any means. She did not understand the social etiquette that came with intimacy and relationships. A blush here and there and awkward words weren't justifiable cues of her attraction. If anything, Naruto likely saw these things as what they were. Awkwardness and embarrassment. Outright telling him, verbally that is, that she was attracted to him was obviously the direct path. Logic dictated so. But what was that saying? Actions speak louder than words. Yes they did, didn't they? And her actions would prove to be thunderous. Naruto, I need to tell you something. The Jinchuriki was brought out of his thoughts by Konan's rather gentle tone. It was a tone he seldomly heard from her, only when she was talking about something that truly meant something to her. Such as Nagato and Yahiko, a Megakure and even her origami. So, what was she going to say? He could see it in slow motion, such was his perception of time and speed due to his mastering of the Hiraishin. He saw everything, quite literally, in slow motion. Her half-lidded eyes, her scorching cheeks, her puckered lips. He saw everything. And with this enhanced vision, he could prevent it from ever happening. Could stop the action that was about to transpire. A simple flick of his hand and he could gently but firmly hold Konan still to prevent the action that was about to occur. But he didn't. When her hand grasped a hold of his shirt, tugging him forward to meet her halfway, he could have broken her wrist. Could have pushed her away to avoid the scenario he had dreamed about for weeks. Could have done anything to prevent this. But he didn't. Because he didn't want to. He wanted this. He wanted it badly. And with this enhanced perception of time, Naruto succumbed to his inner desires and allowed them to freely run through his veins. These pent-up emotions that threatened to swallow him whole and drown him were begging for release. And he allowed them to consume him like a raging inferno. And yet still, there was a single nagging voice that sat just at the edge of his mind. A small voice that questioned the absurdity of it all. It sat, edging precariously over a cliff and if pushed just enough, could realign him and stop this. But did he wish to listen to it? It brought up good points. Decent points even. How would this work between them? Could it work between them? So many questions ran rampant in his mind and he nearly allowed them to consume him. But something stayed his hand. Perhaps it was the fear of never experiencing love in its rawest form with another individual who returned those emotions. But whatever it was, he was so very thankful that it pushed him forward. Abandoning his fears of rejection and hesitation, Naruto allowed his eyes to close shut. And when their lips connected, softly molding against one another in a tender and yet awkward fashion, both shinobi radiated in the throes of passion and ecstasy. It was clumsy. It was sloppy. Their teeth connected nearly 3 times as their awkward kiss deepened, saliva exchanging from one mouth to the other. Labored breaths were shared between the couple, tongues intertwining with one another, dancing along the walls of each other's orifice. Konan found herself struggling to maintain their lip lock due to her weakened body, but she didn't allow it to stop her. With a strength that surprised even herself, she managed to nearly pull Naruto over the grill. Thankfully it had yet to be turned on, and he suffered little save for a stain upon his pants and shirt. Red-coated nails dug into the Jinchuriki's skin, drawing angry red lines as Konan held onto Naruto, moaning quietly as he explored her mouth. Her body was on fire, and the way his tongue moved against her own was heavenly. Naruto seemed to only add more gasoline to this raging inferno. An uncharacteristically loud noise escaped her, muffled by her sloppy kiss. Naruto's hands were now roaming along her midsection, roughly stroking and rubbing what he could. It was the touch of an experienced man, and yet Konan enjoyed it all the more because of it. The way his fingers fumbled against her shirt, threatening to tear it at the collar, it only further excited her. Such thoughts should have shocked her on how dirty they were being. In public of all places. They should stop, and those thoughts ceased to exist when Naruto took her bottom lip with his teeth, roughly biting down. A cry escaped through her throat, one equally mixed with both pain and pleasure. Any thoughts of stopping were thrown out the window at this point. More. 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 Her fingers roughly dug through the man's blonde locks, grabbing fistfuls whenever he nipped at her lips. Confusion hit her when he released his hold on her lips. It lasted for all of a minute before turning to pure ecstasy as those lips found purchase upon her neck. Her amber orbs rolled upwards before fluttering shut as a particularly loud moan escaped her lips, followed by a keening hiss as his teeth sank into her flesh. His enlarged canines nearly pierced her skin, and had they done so, she wouldn't have even minded. The rush of adrenaline that shot through her body provided her with a strength that she previously had lacked. And with movement that shocked even her partner, she managed to swing her legs atop Naruto's lap, planting herself upon his thighs while gripping his chin. More. She uttered lustfully, fingers roughly gripping the man's face, lips descending upon his own, fighting for dominance. And Naruto obliged to her request, though he refused to allow the woman to dominate their exchange. Rough and calloused hands planted themselves upon the kunoichi's rear end, fingers sinking deep into her flesh. A muffled moan was her response, and Naruto's grip nearly doubled for it. Saliva dribbled down Conan's chin, and she ignored it in favor of grinding her hips against Naruto's lap. She could feel his enlarged member with each gyration, and it only further spurred her on. Dozens of dirty and indecent scenarios filtered through her mind, and Conan was a slave to them. She wanted to ride him. Here and now. Tommy. She moaned loudly, tilting her head back as his lips nibbled upon her neck, drawing angry red marks as he bit and sucked upon her porcelain skin. When one of his hands lifted off her bottom, she was confused for all of a second before a stinging sensation emanated followed by a thunderous crack, resembling that of a whip. A loud smack resonated in the room, followed by one of the most erotic noises that had ever escaped Conan. Her thighs tightened up tremendously and a blanket of white-hot pleasure emanated from deep within her loins. Her amber eyes crossed viciously as her thighs began to shake and convulse. Conan was far from an expert when it came to sex and intimacy, but she was absolutely positive that she had just had an orgasm. Her mind was muddy and she couldn't even think straight. The only thing that truly registered was the unholy amount of pleasure that racked her body and the burning sensation upon her rear end. She had lost track of time due to her pleasure-ridden mind. It could have been 30 seconds, and even could have been 5 minutes, such was the high she was experiencing. But when she finally began to come down from it, she was confused as to why the pleasure had stopped. What was wrong? A quick glance downward proved that Naruto had stopped roaming his hands along her body. Not thinking twice about it, she proceeded to gyrate her hips once again, desperately seeking that pleasure again. Why was he not reacting? A low grunt sounded out beneath her ear, and it nearly caused her to smile. This was intoxicating, the things she could make Naruto do with such a simple gesture. She wanted to see more of it. Why? She huffed heavily, lips biting at his neck. Have you stopped? She didn't receive an answer for a few moments, but furrowed her eyebrows when she heard a quiet squeak from the Jinchuriki. Hey Conan. Naruto hissed, squeaked, into her ear. The paper wielder finally pulled away from the man, glancing down at him with confusion. Her confusion only seemed to increase at the rather mortified expression upon his face. Why? Wella, familiar female voice boomed out from behind them. You two work fast, huh? And so open, how scandalous. Conan's amber orbs widened to saucers at Minami's teasing voice. Her head snapped back so fast that she was certain she had pulled every muscle in her neck. Her shock bled away, instantly being replaced with mortification. Oh, silly me. The hostess bowed with a cheeky smile. Don't mind me, please do continue. It's not every day I get to see two lovers mid-copulation. Please, keep going. Nope. Absolutely not. Her mind couldn't fathom the situation she found herself in. Conan had never felt so horrified in her life. Having been caught in the middle of doing things with a man she loved. She couldn't take it. Her mind shut down. The last thing she recalled was the concerned cries emanating from Naruto. The park was nice. Yep. Nice indeed. There was grass there. Some grass here. Even a tree. And some birds. How nice. Yep. Nice indeed. That grass sure is grass. Conan agreed with her companion. That grass was indeed grass. Yes. It's very green. Naruto agreed with that. Very green indeed. Yep. Boy, this was incredibly awkward. The couple, after being caught doing some rather unsavory actions in the restaurant, had eaten in silence, not conversing with another due to embarrassment. What could you really say after something like that anyway? Naruto lacked intimate experience with women. A lot of his friends had called bullshit on that, considering that both Kakashi and Jiraiya were known for their overt pervertedness and playboy-like attitudes. But it was the truth. The little experience Naruto had with women came from Sakura. And that was a rabbit hole he never wanted to experience ever again for as long as he lived. What had happened with Conan was brand new to him. He hadn't even been really aware of what was happening in the restaurant. His mind had been clouded with pleasure, and had they not been interrupted well, he was sure that they'd have done the deed right then and there. But he did feel anxious now. Concerned and worried if Conan had enjoyed what had happened. She was a private woman through and through. Something like this was surely to have been seen as negative. Hey Conan, he mentally kicked himself for sounding so nervous. What happened in the restaurant did well, you know. He fidgeted with his headband, face staining crimson as he avoided her gaze. Did you enjoy it? Did she enjoy what had happened? Absolutely. Without a doubt, 100%. It was, well, she couldn't find the accurate words to describe it. She had done something so dirty and hadn't even gave it a second glance. She had been intimate with a man for the first time in nearly 2 decades. What did they call it? Touch-starved. Conan found that that was pretty accurate. She never could have imagined just how much pleasure could emanate from a single stroke of the hand. Conan had been putty in Naruto's hand, and just thinking of the experience caused a wave of warmth to shoot through her body. Her face quickly stained crimson, and she ducked her head, staring at the ground below her. Why yes, did you also enjoy yourself? Tommy, she felt like cringing. That question had physically hurt her to say. Yeah. He answered a bit too quickly, embarrassed at how fast he had said it. Ahem. He coughed into his fist, moving his headband up to expose his Byakugan. He was quiet for several seconds, mentally going over his words. He steered the woman towards one of the various benches in the park, setting the woman's wheelchair just a foot in front of where he was going to sit. A second later, he took his seat in front of the woman, ignoring her curious gaze. Deciding to be as blunt as possible, he spoke, avoiding her beautiful amber eyes. Do you feel the same way that I feel? There. He said it. He had ripped the band-aid off. Time would only tell if Conan truly felt the yes. The answer shouldn't have surprised Naruto, it didn't really. It was the speed at which Conan had answered it and the emotion behind it. His dual-colored orb snapped out, learns the woman, taking in her embarrassed expression. Conan seemed so small, frail. Almost like broken glass. Had she feared that he wouldn't feel the same? You do? He still found himself asking. In hindsight, it was terribly stupid to do so. Conan was a woman of few words, but when she spoke, she said things. Things that carried weight. Crimson painted the woman's cheeks, giving way to color that complemented her beautifully pale skin. Yes, I do. She ducked her head briefly as she continued. It took me far too long to accept it though. Naruto's hand slowly moved forward, grasping a hold of the woman's own. His thumbs ran tiny circles upon the back of her hand as she spoke. Were you scared? Conan's gaze shifted away from those beautiful eyes of his, and she nodded. That damn ability of yours, she gripped quietly to herself, ignoring the small smile upon Naruto's face. How long have you known? A sheepish expression painted the man's features as he continued his gentle ministrations. Well, I knew that something was bothering you. I just, didn't know what it was. Negative emotions can be incredibly easy to interpret, but they can also be ridiculously complex. Just because I know you're scared doesn't mean I know what is causing it. If that makes any sense. Conan guessed that made sense. She had been scared to explore these new emotions concerning Naruto. Fearful that he'd reject her, and while that was always a possibility, her mind wouldn't have been able to accept it. Nearly 20 years of closing herself off from anything revolving around intimacy and love had changed her fiercely. And then along comes a single man, absolutely decimating the walls she had built over the expanse of 20 years. Naruto had quite literally forced himself through those walls and shifted her entire outlook on life. And yet, she still had that single nagging, incessant voice that was steadfast in its way, trying to derail all of this. It screamed at her. Telling her she was unworthy of his love. It belittled her and tried to break her down. But one glance at Naruto's gentle and caring expression told her otherwise. He cared for her. He wanted her. And Conan wanted him. Is it wrong? She questioned quietly, eyes falling to their conjoined hands. Naruto's eyebrows furrowed. Is what wrong? She gripped his hands tightly as she spoke. Is it wrong that I feel like? She struggled to say the words, but persevered as Naruto continued his gentle strokes. That I feel like I'm undeserving. There was silence for nearly a minute as Naruto thought about what to say. Finding the right words, he spoke softly. I think that's normal. His words caused Conan to raise her head, eyes focused on his. Considering everything you've been through and how shinobi view platonic and romantic relationships, it would be kinda odd if you didn't think that. Whenever we're together, you'll get this certain look and then I'll start feeling all the regret and self-hate. I never pried into it, but I always kinda just knew what was happening. I don't deserve to be happy. Why did I get a second chance? How can I be happy knowing the wrongs I've done? I think that speaks volumes of who you are as a person. The ability to acknowledge the regret you feel for your previous actions, it's better than what most people in our society can do. Most people in our world just want to enforce their beliefs on others, not caring what others have to say, and believing themselves to be just and right. But that's the thing. A sigh left him as his gaze lowered to their hands. There is no right or wrong in our world, at least not in the traditional sense. Our society is one built off the backbone of suffering and war. What's fundamentally right and wrong mean nothing to Shinobi. Killing is the norm for us. For me to sit here on my soapbox and condemn those who perpetuate these ridiculous notions while simultaneously doing the exact same things is disingenuous. I've done these exact same things too, and yet I judge those who do the very same thing. The only difference is that I acknowledge that what I'm doing is wrong. The crooked smile framed his face as he squeezed Conan's hands. So, you don't think you deserve to be loved because you've done a lot of bad, right? A self-deprecating chuckle left his lips as he shook his head. I sometimes feel that way too. I've killed people for the safety of those I cherish and care for, and I did it with no hesitation. Do those people not have brothers, sisters, father, and mothers? Why do I get to dictate what is right and wrong? Because I have a lot of strength. If there's one thing I truly respected about Nagato, it was his philosophy on our world. I, by no means, agree with his actions, but his words were what moved me. His eyes rose to the sky as he recited the exact words Nagato had said to him during the destruction of Konoha. We both want the same thing. We both want the peace Jiraiya spoke of. You and I are no different. We're both working for our own justice. The justice I have meted out against Konoha is exactly the same as what you're trying to mete out against me. Everyone feels the pain of loss the same. You're working for your justice, and I, for mine. We are just two ordinary men, driven to revenge in the name of justice. But if this revenge is called justice, then that justice breeds yet more revenge. And becomes a thread of hatred, woven tightly together like a chain. As long as there is love in this world, there will be hate. For as long as you seek to protect those you love, there will always be the opposite spectrum. Those who would punish you for taking that which they loved. The world of Shinobi is ruled by hatred, fueled by the selfish desires to protect that which you love. I used to lose sleep thinking about what he said to me. For all the hate I hold against Nagato, I couldn't find a rebuttal to his words. And when he killed Hinata, a bitter expression formed on his face, and he appreciated the tender touch emanating from Conan. It only proved his entire point. I believed that killing Nagato would bring justice to all the people who suffered that day, but it didn't. It only left a bitter hole in my heart that refused to be mended. And if I'm being honest, he took a deep breath before slowly meeting Conan's face. I'm terrified of what I'll do if something happens to you. I mean, just look at what happened when Hinata died. Conan cringed at the thought. Naruto had turned into something unholy. He ran a bloody trench through the destruction of Konoha, battering the Diva path and nearly overwhelming it with brute force and strength. It had been a terrifying thing to gaze upon. Seeing the strongest path pushed to its absolute limits before inevitably falling to the 9 tails that sprouted from Naruto's back. And that had been when he was weaker. It was a harrowing thought. All the power that he now possessed was a recipe for disaster. Had Naruto been a different man, then she would have feared those words. But Conan's hands vacated their hold before slowly resting against the man's chin. She closed the distance between the two of them, tilting her head just enough before pressing her lips against the man's own. DDA be damned, Conan couldn't bear to see the man she grew to love struggle with such difficulty. He had shown her a side of himself that he had hidden deep within himself. For all of his flaws, he was just a man. Albeit a man with tremendous power, but a man nonetheless. Naruto was a man who portrayed himself to be an unshakable and unmovable force. To never back down from anything. Persevering through the worst of the worst and coming out better because of it. A man with the weight of the world upon his back who did so just so others wouldn't have to. But at the end of the day, he was a man. A man who possessed insecurities of his own. A man who felt pain just like any other. A man who suffered in silence so as to not be a burden upon those he cared for. Foolish man, Conan mentally berated, deepening the kiss, running her fingers through his spiky locks. Why didn't you tell me sooner? This kiss was so unlike their first one. Where that one had been feral and fueled by lust, this one was gentle and loving. Naruto's hand sought her waist and instead of squeezing tightly, struck them softly. Conan, having grown emboldened, prodded the boy's teeth with her tongue, asking for permission. And Naruto obliged without a second thought. Their kiss did not deepen though, tongues swirling against one another in a slow dance. Naruto was the first to pull away, resting his head into the crook of her neck. Conan couldn't find it in herself to think negatively about it. His arms wrapped around her body, squeezing just tightly enough so as to not be uncomfortable, which Conan returned with little hesitation. The couple sat there for several minutes, ignoring any who passed, reveling in the comfort of one another. The silence was eventually broken by Naruto. That means we're official, huh? He spoke cheekily, smiling into Conan's neck. A dash of pink spread through the woman's features, though she cared little for it. The warmth that spread throughout her body at his words. It would seem so, she murmured quietly, closing her eyes and basking in the man's presence. Naruto sensed them before they even truly appeared. He subtly pulled the woman closer towards his body while removing his head from the crook of her neck. Duanbu appeared a few feet in front of the duo, hands resting at their sides and postures rigid. Hokage-sama wants to see you. Don't be late. Brat. The duo then disappeared, not uttering another word. Ah, Inu is still Inu. Refreshing. Naruto grunted quietly, slowly standing to his feet and relinquishing his hold on his girlfriend. Still have to get used to that one. Up we go. Konan nearly yelped in surprise when Naruto's hands looped beneath her thighs, holding her close to his chest, allowing her head to rest just beneath his chin. Let's see what mom wants, though I'm sure I already know what she wants to say. Konan was becoming increasingly anxious at the thought of having a conversation about her new relationship with the boy's surrogate mother. This was not going to end well. Not a scenario in the world that would prove positive in this situation. Regardless if Tsunade had pushed her to pursue these new feelings with Naruto, this was still going to be something scary. It's gonna be okay, Konan-chan. Just trust me, yeah. Konan's eyes sought the man's mismatched ones for a moment. She stared into those beautiful eyes of his before hesitantly nodding her head. Trust him. She could do that. He had done nothing but make her feel safe. If all he asked for was a modicum of trust, then she'd give him all of it. No longer would she bite her tongue. No longer would she allow her negative thoughts to continue holding her down, preventing her from blossoming and cherishing the relationship she now had with the man she cared for. Konan was going to change. She was going to be everything and more. Words were difficult for her, but actions. Actions she could do. And she'd prove them. She swore upon it. Naruto kicked the double doors of the Hokage office open, splintering the wood and sending it shattering against the glass planes of the office. Shut the fuck up. I love you too. Eat a dick. Konan would never get used to their odd dynamic. Even now, they were casually insulting one another and bickering like two children. It was a sight to see, that was for sure. So, what's this I hear from the six-winged lotus about a certain couple getting down and dirty in a private booth? Tsunade finally questioned with a raised eyebrow, crossing her arms against her chest, propping her large up. The silence was incredibly telling. And the atomic blushes on both of their faces was the sinker. Tsunade was genuinely surprised. She had thought it would have taken a lot longer for the two to come to terms with their feelings. And even more surprising was how intimate they had gotten in that booth. Oh, Tsunade had heard quite the tale from Minami. The two had nearly had sex right then and there in the booth. And while annoying to hear about considering she saw Naruto as a son and her dislike of Konan mounted atop one another at list, they were happy. But she couldn't just allow them to fuck in public. That was bad publicity, and she didn't want to hear about how the hero of the Leaf was having sexual relations in public with the most wanted woman in the elemental nations. Look. She began nonchalantly, resting her elbows upon her desk. I'm happy for you both. Really, I am. However, please refrain from engaging in such acts while in public. I don't need to tell you why that's bad. You two are smart enough to know that. If you're gonna fuck, do it at home. And that's all I really wanted to say. She casually waved off the couple, returning her gaze to the paperwork upon her desk. As the door to her office opened, she added one last thing. Remember to wear a condom. I don't want to be a grandma just yet. I still got a couple years in me. Their squawks of embarrassment was like music to her ears. They were too easy. She genuinely was happy for them. Naruto deserved to be loved and Konan seemed genuine in her affection. And while it pricked at her pride to be in the presence of the woman, she'd swallow her pride and allow her son to be happy. Naruto held Konan closely, traversing through the village atop the rooftops to attract less attention. He allowed his mind to wander as he squeezed Konan closer. Never had he thought would he have found love with a woman. It was jarring, even now. Even as she snuggled deeper into his embrace, hands gripping his shoulder tightly, it was surreal. He almost thought it wasn't real. He had dreams, several of them in fact, about scenarios such as this. And for the first time in a long time, he was allowed to just relax. You truly are the most unpredictable individual I've laid my eyes upon. It'd be disgusting if I didn't respect you. A small smile blossomed upon Naruto's face at Kurama's words. I'm surprised myself, Kurama. I never thought I'd find real love. Even less so in someone I saw as an enemy kin to surreal. Kurama was silent for a moment before quietly uttering a response. Do well to control that temper of yours. Love can drive a mortal to the brink of madness. Speaking from experience, buddy. There was no venom in his retort, only idle curiosity. Something like that. Kurama waved off. Do not bother me further. Naruto was just going to ignore Kurama's dismissive attitude. You know, considering Kurama had spoken first and all that. Glancing back down at Konan's lavender tresses, a genuine smile bred to life. Life was good. Mommy. Konan awoke with a gasp as she felt a sizable weight jump onto her. Years upon years of honed instincts screeched in protest at the unknown assault. Mommy. Dilated amber orb snapped to the sound, expecting an attack that never came. A moment of silence passed by as Konan's racing pulse began to finally settle. The lavender-haired woman blinked as the unknown weight that had woken her up suddenly shifted. Conan blinked in confusion as her eyes landed upon herself. No, that wasn't quite right. This wasn't her but a child that shared identical features to herself. Bright amber eyes that were only a shade darker than her own stared into her own eyes with adoration and unfiltered love. Pudgy cheeks framed a familiar megawatt smile, and if Conan was being honest, it could probably light up the sky if it wanted to. Lavender hair not unlike her own fell down the small girl's back, held together by a sloppy ponytail. She possessed a rounded chin with slightly slanted eyes. The most distinctive features, however, were the adorable whisker marks that painted her cheeks. 3 marks for each cheek. Conan's heart began to thump erratically once again. Who was this? Mommy? The little girl exclaimed once again, bottom lip twitching outwards. You need to get up. Up. Daddy says breakfast can't be eaten if you're not up. Tiny hands reached up to grasp a hold of Conan's nightgown. Daddy made waffles. Waffles, Mommy. Waffles. Conan was deaf to it all. She couldn't focus on anything. Couldn't think. Couldn't even breathe. This was tears. They fell and she was hopeless to stop them. Her face scrunched up and Conan was positive that she looked like a wreck. She was an ugly crier and she knew it. With shaking hands, Conan gingerly reached out to the beautiful little girl. The child, whose excited expression disappeared upon noticing her mother's crying face, only curiously gazed at the woman. Conan's hands gently settled on the side of the child's face, as if she was made of glass and expensive material. My baby. With tears still streaming down her face, Conan sobbed aloud. Her chest heaved, not painfully mind you, but in joy. The name? What was her name? It came to her a second later. Nanami, my beautiful baby girl. Without warning and to the surprise of the child, Conan latched onto the girl and pulled her into her bosom, sobbing loudly. She mumbled incoherently as she stroked her daughter's hair and squeezed her tightly, whispering gibberish. Though confused and worried, Hinami allowed her mother to squeeze her and hold her. She didn't know why Mama was crying, but she'd make sure that her mommy was okay. Daddy always said that Mama would sometimes get sad and that it was her job to make everything better. Mama was always happy when she was around, after all. Daddy said that hugs can cure cancer. Hinami exclaimed cheerfully from her squished position. Taking her tiny arms and stretching them as far as she could, Hinami wrapped her mother in the biggest hug she could muster. It only caused Conan to sob louder. Conan. A familiar masculine voice spoke. Baby, are you okay? The man spoke, voice getting louder as he made his way down the hall. Hinami. Mommy's crying again. Hinami responded to the man. I'm giving her my biggest hug, Daddy. The man chuckled as he neared the door. That's my girl. Hinami only giggled as the door to the room was slowly opened. Amber eyes immediately locked onto the man. Her tears only continued further as she stared at Naruto. He had gotten even taller somehow. His chin had become a bit more narrowed and his hair was slightly shaggier than in his younger years. He possessed thin stress lines upon his cheeks, not unlike a certain Rogue Uchiha, and his mismatched eyes were as vibrant as ever. That smile, that damn goofy smile. Watcha crying for this time? He jibbed in amusement, slowly making his way towards the bed. It's always something with you, ain't it? Despite his obvious teasing and good-natured words, Conan couldn't stop the sobs escaping her. When it was clear that Conan wasn't going to stop anytime soon, Naruto's smile disappeared. Hey, he soothed lovingly, making his way towards the bed and taking a seat by his wife. What's wrong? His left hand gently came up to stroke her chin, brushing aside some of her lavender tresses. Talk to me. Conan only wanted to cry even harder. Kami, she was a wreck. Sniffing obnoxiously at that, Conan leaned into the man's touch. I don't know why Hinami she physically struggled to hold back the tears as she shook her head. It's everything I ever wanted. She proceeded to slam her head into Naruto's shoulder, sobbing and shaking. The blonde man tilted his head down, eyes softening as he stared at his wife. His arms gently enclosed around his wife and daughter as he pulled them closer, allowing Conan to cry to her heart's content. The family stayed like that for what felt like hours until. You need to wake up, Conan. What? You need to wake up, Conan. Naruto repeated once more. No and no, please, no. Conan. Wake up. No. She didn't want to. She wanted to stay here forever. Wake up, Conan-chan. Hinami. Conan screamed awake, eyes blinking rapidly, vision unfocused and distant. She felt a pair of strong hands gently roam across her shoulders. Words she could faintly hear someone, Naruto, speaking. What he was saying was muffled by the pounding in her head. Conan. Hey. You're okay. You're okay, it was a dream. Naruto's hands gently caressed the woman's face, guiding her vision to his mismatched orbs. He allowed the woman to slowly recuperate before speaking slowly. It's okay. You're okay. It was just a dream. What he didn't expect was for the woman to suddenly burst into tears. Her arms immediately shot towards him, grabbing a hold and tearing angry red lines into his skin. Her sobs echoed out loudly in the hospital room as she clung to him, squeezing him tightly. Naruto did the only thing he could and gently held the crying woman. His fingers threaded through the woman's tresses as he whispered lovingly into the woman's ear. Soft kisses feathered the side of Conan's head as she squeezed Naruto tightly. Her dream, it had been so vivid. She had thought it was real. And when she had awoken she wasn't sad per se, but it was like a longing. That dream had been everything she had ever wanted in life. A family. Ever since she was a little girl she had always dreamed of having a loving husband and a beautiful daughter. It wasn't until she experienced the harsh reality of life that she abandoned that particular dream. Alongside various other pipe dreams and wishes, her childish hope and dreams had died alongside Aim and Yahiko. But it was clear that those hopes and dreams hadn't died. To dream of a loving family and for it to be so vivid, it physically hurt her to wake up. She wanted it. She wanted it so badly. She wanted to be with Naruto until she died, growing old together. She wanted a beautiful baby girl to hold in her arms and bestow the love she hadn't had when she was a child. Conan wanted more than anything in this world to have her dream come true. Izanami? Naruto's voice softly questioned, interrupting Conan's thoughts. Conan briefly froze as a flush of red spread through her features. She squirmed in the man's arms, embarrassed about having such intimate and personal dreams about a man she'd only been with for little less than a day. She spoke quietly and awkwardly, fumbling for an answer that wouldn't make her sound delusional and or odd. Well, it's complicated. What a lame answer. She? Naruto questioned with a raised eyebrow, tone slightly mischievous. Well, whoever she is must be very important if it's enough to make the big, bad and scary angel of Aim to cry hysterically. Despite the drying tears on her face, Conan fixed Naruto with an annoyed expression. Must you be so infantile about this? Yes. That was too fast of an answer. He hadn't thought more than a second in his response. Gonna pout again? No. She didn't pout. She wasn't pouting. You do love to pout. He said matter-of-factly, smiling to himself. No, she didn't. Her brief thoughts about the man's childish nature and antics were halted as his calloused hand stroked her cheeks, drawing her gaze to his. She was taken aback as his lips surged forward, melding against her own. A sharp jolt of electricity shot through her body as she melted against the man, allowing him to dictate the pace. Her breathing hitched in her throat as that same hand that had been caressing her cheek slowly dipped lower, grazing her ear before dipping towards her neck. Conan felt a shiver of pleasure emanate from deep within her breast as his fingers gingerly dragged along her throat, leaving a pleasant yet scorching heat along her skin. His tongue prodded her teeth and she allowed him passage not a moment later, releasing a quiet moan as he dominated their exchange. A searing heat began to spread throughout her body, emanating from her. Tommy, she felt so dirty. Conan very nearly peeled back at her growing arousal, not wishing for a repeat occurrence of being caught while being intimate with the man she loved. Though she tried pulling away, she was prevented by that same hand that gingerly held her throat. A keening hiss escaped her lips as his hand tightened immensely around her throat. It had her eyes shooting wide, focusing on his face. The look in Naruto's eyes had Conan's thighs rubbing together. The want. The desire. The arousal. Conan was a stranger to these feelings as she had never been truly intimate with a man. And so, she did what any woman in her position would do. She allowed her lover to continue doing as he pleased, submitting to his touch with a breathy moan. Would you look at that? Seemed she was more submissive than she initially had thought. Those thoughts only spiraled as she felt Naruto's other hand maneuver through her hospital gown. If she thought his touch had been warm and hot before, then it was practically blazing now. Those fiery digits grazed along her porcelain skin, rubbing along her toned abdomen. Conan moaned against Naruto's mouth as she grabbed at his own body, not able to control herself due to his touch. Her nails dug and scratched at him, drawing red marks and pulling at anything she could. A rough growl emanated from Naruto's throat due to her ministrations, and it only further emboldened her. As Naruto's fingers glided along her skin, Conan returned the favor of her own. Slipping her dainty hands under the man's clothes, she began to drag her nails along his muscular and toned body.